been running independent alternative events for over 20 years. Join me and my guests as we share stories and insights into our times working in the unpredictable world of producing events.
My guest has built a legendary reputation in the live sound production industry, mixing many bands in dozens of venues over the decades. These days, he teaches his craft to new potential soundies and still rocks out on stage. Rik Vandervelde, welcome to the show, mate.
Oh, thank you very much, Ivan. Nice to be here.
Great to have you on, mate. Now, the first question I ask my guests, we start at the very, very beginning of your early influences, but we go back further. Where'd you grow up and where'd you go to school?
Yeah, like perhaps back further in the womb. How about that? They say that music is already influencing you inside your mother. And my mother was in music every night. Oh. Loud classical music, choirs, plays, piano rehearsals. They were banged away next to my head the moment I was born. Early influences is basically the music that was on the radio, because as it turns out, I didn't like my parents' or my grandparents' music that much.
No.
And it was just drifted by me. I probably liked a little bit of the Everly Brothers and Roy Orbison. That's before the Beatles.
Well, before we get to where did you grow up and where did you go to school?
Well, I was in Holland and I was in Amsterdam.
Yep.
And Amsterdam was a little bit like, later I found out, San Francisco, very cosmopolitan.
Oh, yeah.
Full of people from everywhere, and especially in the 60s, the people in the street were all white, but who was black? The occasional American serviceman that had gotten away from the draft.
Oh.
And where did they go? Well, they were interesting to Dutch bands. There was Dutch bands with black American singers.
Oh.
And without the black American singer, their English was just woeful.
Sure.
And with it, they were international. So you may want to check this up, but like Chubby Checker came to Holland.
Oh, yeah.
He married a Dutch girl.
Oh, yeah.
And he sang with a Dutch band called ZZ and the Maskers, which really means the Masks. And the guy who was the main guitarist in that, Jan de Hont, is still my Facebook friend.
Oh, really?
So that goes back to 1964, and I was 8. He was, of course, a little older, being in a band. But my influences were really, the music that was around then was so much more joyful and fun than the older music. Don't forget, my whole older generation before me had the war, and they were still depressed. In fact, they were traumatized for the rest of their lives.
Yeah.
While I was just a little kid looking for something fun. And the first time I took notice is when Bob Dylan hit the radio with Like a Rolling Stone.
Oh, yeah.
How does it feel? And I go, he's not trying to be nice, you know. That Positively 4th Street is the other one there, that starts real sneering as well. And the sneering sound of it attracted me, because I thought this is an expression of real feeling rather than being at your best behaviour and doing a happy, happy, glad, glad type thing.
Yeah. Well, Bob Dylan says in an interview I saw that his inspiration to write music was that the music at the time was so bad, and he said that the number one hit at the time when he was growing up was How Much Is That Doggy in the Window?
Yeah, it got pretty silly, I guess, in the 50s. But that was also after the war. That was their version of not being too heavy, I guess.
Yeah, I suppose, and sort of swaying focus away from politics and war and.
Yeah, and to this day, I actually don't like politics and war in songs, because to me, songs are the escape from it. But then one of my most favourite bands ever is Midnight Oil, and it does nothing but.
Well,
there's always a contradiction to what I...
Yeah, absolutely. It depends on the artists, what they go into it for. I just watched a 6-part series on the history of Kiss, narrated by Gene and Paul, you know. And none of their music is political. It's all about just having a good time, you know. And when when they got attacked by Christian groups and religious groups for being satanic and everything like that.
Kids in the service of Satan, they called them.
Yeah. Well, they were obviously like one of the target groups, but there's been other groups like AC/DC and. But yeah, an artist either uses their talent to tell a story or send a message.
Yeah, so when I was little, I didn't understand the words. I was Dutch. And I'm now 66 years old, and I've had 50 years of listening to English language, and I still don't listen to them. I actually concentrate on the melody and the phrasing, and the words are a bonus.
Yeah.
But I must say that sometimes I wake up in the morning with the radio on, which is always on because of the tinnitus I suffer from, I listen to the words as I wake up, and I go, shit, is that what they were singing about? And I sometimes only realise that 40 years after the fact.
Yeah, I'm a little bit like that now these days, where the music sort of stands out more than the words. But when I discovered punk music back in the day, it was all about the words. You know, it wasn't so much about the riffs or the hooks.
But I was there and I couldn't have heard them. I did sound for it and I couldn't hear the bloody
Well, that's
word.
why you're a sound guy, not a wordsmith.
I could see they were angry about something, but I didn't know what.
So while I was preparing for your interview, I went on your Facebook page, and fortunately, you posted a biographical order list of all your sound production work, spanning from...
See, that list came from me cleaning up my computer.
Oh, did it?
And actually, I was trying to find my guitar list of guitars that I need to work on, and I just started cleaning up files in order to find where it went, and there it was. And I thought, I'll put it on there. I'll put it on.
Well, your first top of the list, it says Netherlands, 1956, which I assume that was your birth date.
Correct.
To 1974. So is that how long you spent in
Yeah. So I did 10 years in Amsterdam, and my parents moved to the country. And right next door to where I went to school, and coming out of the pub where I was a band called QB and the Blizzards.
Nice.
And QB and the Blizzards had a great guitarist called Eelco Gelling. And the history of that is that when John Mayall came to Holland with his band, which contained no other than Peter Green, he had a support, and they were a support.
Oh.
And when his guitarist seemed to leave him, he went to Holland all by himself in a little car and met him at the rehearsal, trying to get this guitarist out of that band.
Oh.
So we almost had a Dutch guitarist in a John Mayall band. Later on, the same man joined the Golden Earring when they were on their big tour after Radar Love through the United States, and he played great slide.
Oh.
But all these musicians were also into their own thing. They never stuck together long enough. But anyway, in the north of Holland, there was QB and the Blizzards. In Amsterdam, where I was just about everything else. There's amazing bands there. There's a band called Amsterdam, who no one remembers anymore, but I still remember how great they were. You know, like at the time, the Hammond organ was really big.
Oh, yeah.
Sort of the same thing as if you go into Australian history, the band that Lindsay Wells was in, which is called Healing Force.
Okay.
And they had a song called Golden something.
Yeah.
And they had this dominating Hammond organ sound, because Hammond organs really was like mid-60s, they became sort of available.
Absolutely.
And it defined the sound, you know, it defined the sounds, and the Dutch bands are all up with that. They seem to make enough money to afford all that gear.
So we're talking about a lot of these bands became progressive kind of rock bands in that time, and especially in the 70s, Europe was bursting with progressive rock bands.
In what I found in Dutch bands, every other Dutch band had a flute in it.
Oh, yeah.
And how was that? Well, you know, people went to school and got lessons, and that's what they could do. And for a while, that was part of it. It went jazzy, but then it sort of faded out. I mean, Jethro Tull was the biggest one.
Oh, and not to forget Herbie Mann.
Okay, well, there's a jazzy one then.
Yeah, Herbie Mann's probably the most well-known jazz.
Well, I had a local band called
player.
Solution, which you can still look up, which is also very classy. Nothing wrong with them, with the flute in it. And that band Focus, that had a flute in it. And the Golden Earring, the biggest band that ever came out of Holland, the singer played the flute.
Oh.
Not that we really wanted to hear it, but it was part of it. And for a while, that progressive rock progressed to where it lost me.
Right.
And you can pretty much trace where I lost it is when Yes came out with their first 4 albums, and I loved them. And then I think it was one called Topographic Oceans, and I was gone. I thought, nah, I can't do this anymore.
That was the end of Yes for you.
Yeah, I mean, I love pop music and I love melody and that. But when it gets too musician-y, that's to me
it falls into the theory too much into
theory. It
theory.
impresses other players, but perhaps not simple people like me.
Well, in your post here, it says that some of the first bands you saw play was Slade and The Faces.
My parents were very Christian and didn't allow me to see any bands. So, especially in Slade, I had to literally go there and cop the punishment afterwards.
Right.
And they were playing on the side of the Concertgebouw, which is the main concert hall in Amsterdam, where I sang as a little kid in a classical choir, and now there was them. Mind you, they were in the little side, smaller room, and I had never seen a rock band like that, never heard one. And I can't say I liked it 100%.
Oh, really?
I liked their single, Mama We're All Crazy. Now,
you think they're more of a studio band than a live band?
Not at all. They were totally a live band.
Oh, okay.
But they poked me in the ear with volume like you wouldn't believe. So I'm a live sound guy now, but then I thought live sound was like circus stuff, like how loud can we go?
Oh.
And as a guitar player, I sometimes lust after amplifiers from the day. One of those amplifiers was a high watt.
Okay.
Guitarists know you can't get a good sound out of a high watt till you turn it up. They had 14 of them on stage.
Wow.
14.
14.
Mind you, I think they're all double, so they probably use 7, but that was enough.
Okay.
That was enough. And I was at the back of the room, and I went on a Monday or Tuesday. On Friday, my ears were still ringing.
Wow.
Full tilt.
Yeah.
And ever since I've done shows like that where other bands have been that loud, I don't mix that loud, and people have literally lost their hearing at those volumes where they go, it's never been the same.
Yeah, I've almost come close in the past. It's not good.
So I wasn't that impressed by that. I thought they were dumb working class Englishmen. Oh, watch out, Rick, and get in trouble. But
are they Scottish?
The songwriting was fantastic. Wolverhampton. That's sort of near, is it near Manchester or
I don't know.
near Birmingham? It's sort of right in the middle of England.
Okay.
And proudly so. So they come from the same place as Judas Priest.
Oh, okay. Also, tell me about how The Faces were on stage.
Well, another disappointment.
Oh.
I was a big fan. I had all of Rod Stewart's solo albums and the Faces ones. There was, by that time, already 6 of them. And this is when Stay With Me was in the charts.
Yep.
And that was from A Horse... A nod is as good as a blind whatever. That
Not as good as a wink?
To a blind horse, yeah.
Yeah.
I loved all of it.
Yeah.
Produced by Glyn Johns, whose name was on the back of every album I liked.
Wow.
So I thought, I'll look forward to this now. Where was it? It was in a cyclodrome, meaning an indoor stadium where people go around on cycles.
Oh.
And of course it sounds like a big empty bathroom.
Wow.
And then they were on the stage down below, and I was with my cheap ticket right at the top. And they played for less than 40 minutes and left.
Really?
Finished by Rod Stewart taking the mic stand and breaking it over his knee, which is sort of a bit like kicking off the drum kit off the riser or smashing a guitar.
Trashing the stage.
Well, that's the end of the show. That's what it says as well.
Do you think they were upset about something in the process of...
No, I was with the crew later as I went to England. The very men that were there, they said we were all in a rush to get backstage to finish the coke that was still there.
Oh.
And whoever got there first...
Glad I asked.
There's all the fans just stuff them, it's terrible.
Okay, well, let's talk about when you first joined your band, Chookie Boogie.
Yeah, the Chookie Boogie.
The Chookie
The
Boogie
Chookie
band.
Boogie was me and a drummer looking for a bass player.
Okay.
And I was in New Zealand and I had no money, but I got a job for a place that fixed radios and televisions. So I built my own speaker box. It looked like I had 4 speakers, but I only had 2. Because I couldn't afford the other 2.
Sure. It looked louder than it.
Yeah, and then I built an amp head out of a kit set, the cheapest way to get an amplifier. But it was, of course, too clean. So then I built a little fuzz box. And by the time I had a little fuzz box, the amp and that, did I sound like what you'd call stoner rock, I guess.
Right.
Not that I could necessarily play. I was a guitarist who liked playing 12-string and 6-string guitar at home. And this was my first electric. So my first chord that I strummed, my mum came walking in and says, "Can you turn that off?" And I just built all that stuff. And I thought, God, what recognition that is.
Exactly.
She was not interested in any of it. So I then had a friend, a drummer, whose father had a chook farm. Hence we called our band the Chookie Boogie Band because we had an empty shed which was used for chickens and is now available. And I put my gear in there, he put his drum kit, and we just started making a noise. And there was little kids nearby, little half Maori, half Irish kids they were, and they would just sit in front of us. And they would, honour us with being an audience. Well, in fact, I don't think we were quite ready for any audience. But I must say, at the first chord, when I turned this thing up, all the cows in the paddock started running.
Ran away.
Yeah, and I didn't want to tell the drummer's dad about that because they're his cows and they weren't going to be good with milk if we do that sort of thing. That was the Chookie Boogie Band.
Wow. And then you were in a band called Pop-Eyed.
Yeah, Pop-Eyed was a commercial band that I ran into after I bought a guitar from a music shop. And the man behind the counter, we chatted about music and he said, "I'm starting my band again, I need a bass player." And I said, "I don't have a bass." And he led me to a place on the edge of town, a very dark room, and there was a man in a bed looking like half out of it.
Yeah.
And he says, "He'll sell you his bass for $65. And the guy was on drugs. And I sort of bought his bass. And it was a Yamaha bass, which is now seen as valuable, SA70 or something. And it was a hollow body bass, which I didn't particularly want, but I couldn't afford the bass that was on the wall in the shop. The bass that was on the wall in the shop was a Fender, early 70s Fender.
Yep.
And it had a particular colour. And the year was 1974. And now fast forward to about 2010, and a man asked me to fix his bass, and it is that bass.
Oh, really?
Yeah, he's from Palmerston North, where I was, and he said, "This is where I bought it," and that's what was on the wall. There was never a second one like that there. So I actually saw it again years later. He's still playing it. His name is Rick Caldwell. But anyway, the band was Pop-Eyed, and we played for pubs, corporate shows, and also university balls.
Okay.
And that was the start of me thinking, gee, they're happy with very little here because I couldn't play that well, but they were dancing.
Oh, yeah. So were you a cover band or what kind of songs were you covering?
We did the original stuff that the band before it had that the singer could sing.
Oh.
And it had Santana in it.
Oh.
But it also had Delaney, Bonnie and Friends in it. It also had Paul Simon in it. It also had Badfinger in it.
Oh, yeah.
And this is basically stuff you hear on the radio.
At the time.
But my radio didn't have much low-end response, and I was playing bass. So I was guessing what the hell it was.
Okay.
Not very well.
No.
Somebody came up to me and said, "You played the same riff for every song." I said, "Well spotted. Can you teach me another one?" So there's no one.
People were still dancing despite.
There's no one to teach me either. You just had to figure it out.
Yeah, right. Were you also self-taught in electronics?
Yeah, sort of. Yeah.
Okay.
My stepfather's mother, who is my third grandmother, was a very enterprising woman and gave me a soldering iron when I was 11.
Okay.
Why does an 11-year-old want a soldering iron? Well, I don't know. She thought I needed one. And so I did a bit of soldering, crystal sets. And soon I was collecting any old broken radios and TVs. They were sometimes just chuck them out, go at the back of the shop, you can get one. I'd take all the parts out of it and try and build something else. And in that process, I developed an interest in being a radio ham, which didn't really happen till I got to New Zealand when I was 18, because Holland was too busy with that stuff. I didn't need that, but in New Zealand I got a bit empty and lonely. So I joined a radio ham club where they really did teach you electronics for like only 3 months or so, but you get all the basics. And that plus the soldering made that I could work for a shop that repaired TV and radio. Again, I didn't finish the apprenticeship, but I learned how to wire all the different connectors of the day and understand things a little bit. I still have my main hi-fi speakers beside my studio monitors, are Bower & Wilkins DM4s. They're right from that year. That's what impressed me then. I still have a pair of those.
Oh, okay, cool.
All the way back to that year, 74.
Awesome. So here you've got Melbourne 77 to 83, and this is when you start. You're a broadcaster.
Yeah.
On 3EA radio.
3EA is ethnic radio. They wouldn't call it that now. They would call it SBS.
Oh.
It was ethnic radio in Victoria.
Okay.
And I was told I had a listener audience of 60,000.
Wow.
And I did Dutch radio. But because I was young and I knew about music, they asked me to do the young people's program in English. And this is like 1977, 78, 80. And I was getting paid $50 an hour for a radio show on air. I read the news and everything. Looked out the window, looked for the weather.
Right.
The weather today? Oh.
Sunny.
Yeah.
Raining.
I didn't take it that seriously.
Okay.
Because I wasn't going to be hurt by it. I just thought this is a different world.
Yeah.
They wanted me because the guy that was doing it had enough, and I was Dutch, so I made a little. The way it started is, I wanted to work at a radio station. So I went to all the radio stations and I didn't have work. So then I started on the recording studios. And then on the recording studios, I ended up at Armstrong's Recording Studios. That's the biggest one in Melbourne.
Yeah.
Possibly still there, Metropolis it was called later. And they were the contract holders of this ethnic radio station. So while I was there, we were first at Armstrong's and then in a new building together with Eon FM. And Eon FM was the very first FM radio, I think, in Victoria. And all the hip people were there upstairs, and then downstairs there was me doing ethnic radio. Same technical crew, which gave me Jimbo Barton, who was the sound engineer for Little River Band's recordings. He was my board operator.
Oh, okay.
Because these were all separate studios where the on-air person didn't operate any technical gear.
Oh.
So I was doing that and feeling quite happy with it and getting great money, but I was slowly getting more into live sound that is way more exciting. I found the audience there were already old, much older than me, and it wasn't. There was no immediate feedback of the audience to me other than a nice letter sometimes.
But it was a good step in the right direction.
Oh, it was me feeling more confident about myself because in New Zealand they had little competitions on the radio, and I knew the answer, and I ring them up, and they were about to put me on air, and then I'd hang up because my legs would be trembling with I'm going to be on the radio.
Okay,
and then I had progressed to just being, and also when I first did it, I pre-recorded it, and eventually I just went live.
Yeah.
So I lost my fear of it. That's sort of the thing you have to go through to get there. I have the same in my sound course where I teach live sound to people who initially are too scared to speak in a microphone.
Yeah.
Just in a room.
Yeah, there's a fear of...
Yeah, and I don't make too much fun of it because I remember I was like that too.
And so from then on, you basically went into sound engineering as a job.
There's a story behind that.
Yeah.
I was at university doing electrical engineering, not showing up to too many lectures I may add. I was not going to pass, I think. But what made me interested is I was involved in a student radio station, which is called 3MU, which had interesting people there. There was a drummer from Rock Quiz. He was there a fair bit.
Oh, yeah.
Peter Luscombe is his name. And there was a DJ comedian called Richard who was also there. And Peter Costello was at the time a student, same time as me. He later on was a politician.
Our ex-treasurer.
Yeah. And there was a few contemporaries I had that was interesting to watch. But as I went past all the recording studios, I still didn't get a job. I did get the job of radio, but in order to get into a recording studio, you had to be part of an inner circle that I hadn't as yet joined, I guess. Where I was, everybody knew everybody, but I didn't. I'd come from New Zealand half a year earlier. I still had to get to know him. So fortunately, at the student radio station was a man who was selling me equipment. I had a budget of $10,000 a year. I was the one in charge of spending it. So, depending on what we needed, new turntables or whatever. So this man would come by from Clarion, I think they were.
Oh, yeah, Clarion.
Probably related to Amber Technology now. And he would talk to me like these reps always do, they try and have a bit of a friendship while at the same time hoping you'd buy something. And he said, I heard of this guy who started a studio and he may need somebody to give him a hand. And he hasn't advertised yet, but he doesn't know anyone either because he's from Norway.
Oh.
So, as it was, halfway between my university and where I lived was this little studio which had just been built by an investor and a Norwegian man. And he said, okay, I'll take you on, but you won't get paid and I'll just teach you. So for 3 months he taught me. He even, he photocopied things out of books. He checked that I'd learned them. I had a bit of a go at this and that. And then he was working on his car in his driveway, standing between his car and a wall, and somebody drove a car into his driveway, hit his car and broke both his legs.
Oh, no.
Yeah, it sounds like I did it because I had a job that night. I felt so sorry for him.
But at least he had you to fall back on.
Because with 2 broken legs, you can't. It takes a while before you even up on the sticks.
It's a very unfortunate incident.
Poor fucker. But
for him,
he was so kind in teaching me, and I was just thrown in the deep end.
Yeah.
And what I had immediately with the band that night was a rapport. I liked what they were doing. They liked my interests. And that just continued for the next 2.5, 3 years.
Okay.
Where he became the executive sort of, business part of it, while I actually did most of the recording then. Okay.
Wow. So you were thwart into this role due to...
Yeah, an accident that otherwise he would have just given me the odd little thing now and then, but instead I got 3 months of teaching and then just full on had to do it now. And, the people that are recorded were people that were all after record deals or getting more work live, and they all went through, what was later Mushroom, Michael Gudinski and Premier Artist, and they heard those tapes. And, one of the bands that I did the demo for was the Aliens, who then got signed. And then they asked me to go and do live sound, and that's how that link came to be.
Oh, okay. I never heard of the Aliens.
Yes, sadly. They looked a bit like the Knack, but the Knack, I think, had white and black ties and shirts, and theirs was the opposite.
Oh.
But there was
just a bit different.
There was a background in that band that was peculiar.
Oh.
Basically, my boss, Norwegian, had become a Scientologist.
Oh.
And he had in his office a huge board with all the jobs, and everyone was wearing different hats. And apparently I had 5 jobs, they all had different descriptions, and he also had many hats, with the idea that if you expand, they all become separate jobs.
Right.
So it was this real business, how to be a successful business from a Scientology point of view.
Okay.
His friend started I was already ordering a pancake. Started a pancake parlour.
Pancake parlour?
Which was the Melbourne version of what was here, the other late night takeaway that was near the entertainment centre.
Oh.
They had the same menu that looked like ye olde menu,
Okay.
Yeah. So the pancake parlour was owned by a Scientologist. So he hired people to do his work, and it turned out to be a whole band, and that was the Aliens. So then when his staff said, we're a band, he said, my friend will record you, and that's how.
Oh.
So there was a Scientology connection in the middle.
Wow, that's gone back. And so then you basically went on to do sound, and some of the bands you've got in here is Sports.
Yeah, well, that was a mistake, really. I had put on the wall, I'm available to mix bands, and someone from the Sports says, we need a lighting guy. And I go, can't do lights? And they said, well, we have a lighting guy, but we need an assistant. The problem was I didn't even know what the word truss meant.
Right.
So I did 2 weeks with the Sports. It was Melbourne and Sydney.
Okay.
I did follow spot every night, and I got to be in among a sort of level of professionalism that I had not yet attained.
Sure, yeah.
They gave me the sack too.
Oh, did they?
Yeah. But it was an interesting learning thing. And
the sports.
The band was in the peak of they came from England just before they had hits on the radio.
Yeah, they achieved a level of success in Australia.
And who was the support act? Boys Next Door.
Oh,
Boys
wow.
Next Door was Nick Cave's band.
Yeah.
And Nick Cave at the time, you could tell he really liked Iggy Pop. He was on stage half naked and tried to throw himself in the drum kit hoping some blood would appear. And he wasn't very popular with the audience. The audience came to hear, who listens to the radio? And then when the Boys Next Door would say, this is our last song, that was the loudest applause of the whole night. They got arrested. The Boys Next Door got arrested in Canberra after they found a roundabout, and they had one of those station wagons this band travelled in. This is pre-Tarago, and they all hung their bottoms out of the windows. So there was like 4 or 5 bums, bare bums, out of the window. And then they kept going around the roundabout till the police showed
And
up.
they brown-eyed everybody.
They mooned anybody on the roundabout till the police held them in overnight, and that one night that they weren't there. That was
Nick Cave's humble beginnings.
Yeah.
Look, you've got a major list of bands here, some known, some unknown, but it says here you're also a stagehand for Kiss.
Yeah, well, of course, the whole thing blows up a bit when I add all the stagehand ones, because I'm basically saying that I worked on a gig for Kiss as a loader, which I did, and at the time that was called stagehand. But in Melbourne, at VFL Grounds, 1980, was the Kiss show. And I remember they were very generous. They gave me lots of free tickets to let my friends go and see it. I remember the light they had on stage that was Kiss in light bulbs was so strong that in the middle of the day when it came on, I went, I closed my eyes and I could see the word Kiss across my eyeball.
Oh, okay, yeah, burnt into your retina.
Backstage, there was guitars going. I saw on a flatbed truck that had come in with the post that was about 10 guitars high, and it all had Gibson on it, and they were all used for fireworks. They tied fireworks to them, and they were seconds, the Gibson second guitars. If you find a Gibson second guitar now, no one says that there's anything wrong with it. They would treat that as a vintage instrument. But
fireworks. So you're talking about the...
They strapped things to them so they could shoot.
Yeah. Well, that would be Ace Frehley would do that. Yeah. He was famous for his shooting guitar.
I probably used one a night and I needed 10 for 10 gigs.
Yeah, well, he also had guitars that poured out smoke and that kind of thing. So they would have all been backup guitars.
So the other thing I noticed, having mixed a fair few bands by now, was that they were all spread out on the stage. The drums was high and they were far away. And that it didn't sound as tight as their recordings.
Oh.
And many years later, I realised that if you get no drum riser or a low one and stand around it, that is really to play music. What they were doing was showbiz. And, they're
mega stages.
Equally respectable, but I am in it for music more than anything myself. And I like some of their songs.
Oh, yeah, Kiss are great. I read Ace Frehley's biography, and he said that he got to a stage with the stage production show, because I think Paul Stanley designed it all the time. And he said it got to a stage where he had to, he had to stand here at this particular time and here at this particular time.
Choreographed.
And it was mainly...
You have to for the lights.
Yeah, absolutely. He also got electrocuted on one of the... because they had these staircases that spiraled down, and he got electrocuted, survived, and then finished the show, but it inspired him to write the single Shock Me.
Okay. It's easy to chafe a cable with lots of aluminium stage stuff. By the way, I did do a rehearsal with that guitar player when he came to the Fly By Night without a sound engineer. So I did my best to get the best monitors and the best mix. And for a couple of hours, it was Ace Frehley and me and the bar staff just listening to his band that he was going to play with. I think he did a gig at the Metropolis, but he rehearsed.
How long ago was this?
Probably it's 2022 now. I would say that's 2009 or something.
Yeah, because he did come to Perth. I saw him play at the Astor.
Probably the time before it, because the Astor wasn't yet the venue then. Yeah.
Yeah, so he would have turned up maybe with his band called Fraley's Comet, I
Some
think.
of his band was also known as Alice Cooper's musicians.
Oh, okay.
I've come across that twice. I've got a great Alice Cooper one, just to skip ahead a little bit.
Yeah, go for it.
I'm in the dressing room of the Marquee in London after having done monitors for John Waite, who I loved, and I had just bought the latest Rolling Stones album, not all that good. It was called Working Overtime or something, and I also just purchased a bass, and in it is this sort of dun bass line that I didn't know how to play. So completely out of the blue, this is honest, I say to the bass player in the John Waite band, yeah, interesting record by the Stones, I got this good bass line. He goes, what track number? I go, 7. He goes, that was me.
Oh, cool.
And I go, that was you? I thought it was Bill Wyman. And he goes, no, they were in Paris and they were getting lots of people to play, and Bill Wyman didn't have the patience to hang around for it all. And he's got the sort of a duck-walky, almost disco-y bass under there that I can now play, because John Reagan, who's still my Facebook friend, who was also in the Alice Cooper band,
Okay.
he showed me how he played his part on the Stones record. But how random is that?
Yeah.
You ask him about a piece of music, not thinking the man's connected to it, but he actually was the one who played it.
Absolutely. These things happen a lot. Kiss had to bring in other people to play on albums because band members weren't available or were
They
comatose.
just made it happen. That's what the potential of making money does.
Yeah, absolutely. But yeah, I saw a recent doco on Alice Cooper, and he headhunts his band members. He went to Hannah Montana kind of gig with his niece or
Nicked a
something,
band member from that, did he?
and he nicked the guitarist from Hannah Montana's band. Did you mix at the entertainment centre?
Yeah, I mixed at the entertainment centre, mainly support acts.
Okay.
The only other thing that I was involved in with Rick Curtin very early on was the World Swimming Championships.
Oh.
And what was interesting about that is that 6,000 kids who are athletes are going to make a hell of a lot of noise, but the person that is talking to them on a little lectern microphone is not necessarily even a public speaker, because there are other athletes that have to talk and they're a bit intimidated by it all. So doing sound for that, trying to get that one microphone over this whole lot, took everything we knew, including, at the time, I learned to put the right height little step behind the lectern. So we had someone backstage saying this person is this tall, and then quickly change the height. Rather than changing the microphone up and down,
you just step
they
on
made
the
them step on a little thing. You couldn't even see that it was happening. They did it. Yeah.
Genius, mate. Those little things matter. I mean, just adjusting a microphone for another speaker, even if you got one microphone, it's going to take...
Clumsy.
It's going to be clumsy. It's easier. I can see a point.
See, and I learned that there. I didn't know that. The other good moment in the End Centre was doing the support for Bryan Adams.
Oh, yeah.
And Bryan Adams had lost his voice.
Oh.
And local support, who is my Facebook friend as well, he had a good voice. So then people said afterwards, oh, your sound was much better than Bryan Adams. But that was a condition of the singing, you know.
Who was the trickiest to mix?
Oh, what over the whole 48 years?
Who stands out that you thought was more of a challenge?
Oh, a challenge. Well, often people are personally a challenge, you know, like people are so full of what they are doing that what they do on stage can be really difficult. I remember standing next to someone doing monitors for John Mayall, and John Mayall would whip out his harp and sing into his vocal mic, cup it, which is already going to feed back, but he also did that while bending over into the wedge. And unless you were really quick, that was another loud squeal of feedback. And what I tell musicians whenever I have a chance, I say, how about at sound checks, you say to the sound engineer, how can I make things easier for you, and what can we do on stage to make it sound better out the front? I have never heard that. I've only heard students repeat it after I asked them.
Oh, okay.
In the real world, I've never heard it.
No.
Well, in fact, when I'm mixing a band, I spent the night before just about not sleeping, thinking on how I could make it better. So I'm constantly busy making it better for them. They have got no thought about what it's like for you.
No.
If they're going to do a torrent of noise and you stand behind the desk, it means that whoever walks in won't give you a job. They go, that's a sound engineer?
Exactly.
Right. So that's delivering you to unemployment. I could get very angry about this whole situation. Instead, I discharge lots of money.
Sure.
I go, pay me.
Yes.
I'm not going to risk my reputation unless there's really good money in it.
Unless it's worth it.
Yeah.
Did you have anything to do with the Sex Pistols tour at the entertainment centre?
I think I saw it, but no, I didn't.
I went to that show.
Yeah.
It was the last gig of the tour, and they just did Europe. They played all these amazing festivals, and they come to Perth, and they hadn't even sold out the lounge area.
Oh, is that right? I'm not sure if I saw it then. I thought, I'm a big fan of Steve Jones. I realised that without even buying the records or knowing it, my guitar playing is highly influenced by Steve Jones.
Oh, well, yeah. He's pretty much... I think Paul McCartney said he was just ripping off Chuck Berry, but then he would say that he was ripping.
Best do that.
Yeah, he would say he was mainly ripping off Johnny Thunders at the time. But I thought I'd ask in case you were there, because it was a pretty good gig, and they had some pretty good supports too. But it was the first. I used to go to see all sorts of bands at the entertainment centre, but I'd never seen a band as legendary as the Sex Pistols not sell it out.
So it was out of its time, perhaps? At the time, what was the floating up as a
Oh,
good
this was
gig
1997. 1997, so about that time, the electronic dance music scene was huge. Music really changed a lot.
So they were seen as oldies?
But they had a better reception in Europe than anywhere else, which makes kind of sense.
Glenn Matlock on the bass.
Glenn Matlock on bass. I remember Steve Jones buffed up, and he was full of tattoos, and they were great. But the first thing John Lydon said, he walked up to the microphone, looked at us, and went, "Is that it?" Oh, all right then. And then they went into Anarchy in the UK, I think.
Yeah.
But they sounded brilliant. But the first thing is I thought of as they must be lapping up the technology now, because technology in 1976
it was mainly failing at the time. It was what is possible now is to do it without any mistakes. And perhaps punk had a lot of failure in it because of what it was. But you want to make the difference between what is helpful for the show and what's not.
Well, they were playing on a completely different sort of platform as well. Instead of small clubs and punk bars and all that, they're playing arenas.
When I was mixing bands around the time of the Sex Pistols coming out, basically the bands were all super loud and ugly and aggressive. And the equipment often, especially with the gigs that we did that didn't have a budget either, was also stressed out. So if you turn your mixer up into your amplifiers into your speakers to the max as they sing, you can turn it up a bit more, because in fact the whole thing sort of compresses, even though there's no such thing as a compressor in between. That means that when the song finishes, the compression stops because they're not singing, and now it starts to feed back.
Oh.
So in between every song it was going woo, 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 and they would try and talk. You go, oh fuck it, 1, 2, 3, 4, and they'd go on to the next one, which is a style later on that I saw mimicked here in Perth by Jet Whitey.
Oh, okay.
They had a similar feedback sound, but it was no longer the PA equipment. That was their microphonic, cheap Epiphone pickups in their guitars that were just whistling, and then that would happen between songs. And when I saw it, I said, I can fix that for you. I can dip that in wax, and then it wouldn't feedback. No, we don't want that. We want the feedback.
Want the feedback. There must be so many small intricacies mixing sound, and you've already mentioned a few that I would never have thought of. These are valuable assets to a good sound mixer.
Yeah, I find a lot of gigs, you think you're going to run a little race, but it's hurdles, and you don't know where they come up, so you trip up over them. Also, all the little things that you can do to make it better live, sound-wise, add up. So every little thing you do may by itself be barely noticeable. By the time you've done 20 of them, it's better.
Yeah, exactly.
My hobby was to work for a new band and make it better. And I usually run into a wall by about the third month. After 3 months, well, this is in the old days where you probably did at least 4 gigs. So, we're talking about 50 gigs. After 50 gigs, you go, I can't make this any better. Where else can I work now?
Yeah.
Because I didn't want to repeat it.
Right.
What I would have done is I would have replaced all the wiring, had my improvements to do with the stage layout, perhaps bought a few bits of vital equipment, and also worked with the band in a way that they now did things slightly differently, and it make a big difference. One good example of a band that asked their sound engineer how they could be better is Metallica.
Oh, really?
Metallica wouldn't do anything on stage without asking the sound engineer, well, is this an improvement? Are you happy with it? For a long time, they took the advice of their sound man, and they were one of the best sounding live acts I've ever seen.
Yeah, I was never a Metallica fan growing up, but when they brought out their sort of Black album on Vertigo, that pricked my ears because they sort of evolved in their songwriting.
Speed metal band, if that's
they were thrash,
and they slowed down, they slowed down partly because of the size. When I did a tour with them through North America and Canada, we played sports halls, so typical like an entertainment center or like an arena that size, up to 12,000 or so probably. A lot of those were ice hockey places.
Oh.
And ice hockey places, you have to put boards on the ice because they're not going to melt it. They're going to ice hockey the next night. And then on that board, you put your cables. But if they fall off the side and lie on the ice, you're in trouble. So at the end of the night, as you pick it up, as you bend it, it snaps the copper inside.
Wow.
I learned that. Also, it was so cold, this is a winter when I did this, that walking from the bus to the venue, which is literally only 10 metres, I would have snow on my mustache, and I could just flick my mustache and it would snow.
Snowflakes came off.
It's just your breath immediately becoming snow in 10 metres. Anyway, so what am I doing? I'm doing a PA, hanging the PA, miking up the band, and I'm also in the band of roadies that does the sound check because the band never does sound checks. But what was I going to say about that? How that band at the time was managed by Cliff Bernstein and Peter Mensch. And if you look where they came from, they did AC/DC before, they did Britney Spears later on. Any of those artists will have a row of albums, that one of them is the killer album. Well, that's the one where they managed it. So did they pick him at the right time, or did they make that really best album happen? I don't know. But Peter Mensch and Cliff Bernstein were an amazing double act. I got to experience them in New York, where there was I just came to. We're not talking about events in Perth yet.
No, no.
I don't mind if it goes a bit longer. Anyway, so in New York, there's Peter Mensch and Cliff Bernstein. Cliff Bernstein's on the side of the room, and he's sort of looking in the bin. And I thought, fuck, they let one in. It looked like someone from outside who was homeless going through the bin. Long beard and like dirty clothes.
Right.
And he's just sitting on the side. In the middle was this guy who looked like a ski instructor. He had sort of permanently blow-waved hair. And that was Peter Mensch. He's bald now, but that's what he looked like then. And he would be holding forth with the band. And they were the ones who kept the whole thing in check. So I'd say the success of that band was the management as much as the band, if not more so. Right. They would have got another band that would have gone.
Oh, yeah.
They were so fucking good as managers.
Yeah.
Anyway, the slowness of the music came from the venues. That's what I was going to say. The venues I was involved in '86 was just as they were getting out of clubs into stadiums, and the stadiums just didn't take very well to. It just became a washing machine.
Right.
So if you go a bit slower, the whole thing breathes better. You go more Led Zeppelin, I guess.
Sure.
That's what they did.
Right.
The fans said they've sold out. Well, they've adapted to where they were playing.
They hadn't sold out. They just play different music. But as I said, I was never really big into Metallica until that album came out, and then I started sort of investigating them a lot further. But they played The Big Day Out, I think it was like 2010 or no, I left by then.
And they were the band that demanded sound checks often the day before.
Right.
No, not becoming the victim of the whole situation like everybody else often is.
When they toured with Big Day Out, I want to say it was 2008, something like that, because I'd worked for the Big Day Out for 9 years by then. And I think my last year was 2009.
We were often there at the same time. I worked for some band at most of them, the sound company in the beginning, bands later on.
Yeah.
And of course, I worked with Allegiance, who was managed by Squasher, who ran the Big Day Out.
I remember Allegiance. Yeah. But I used to do this thing at the Big Day Out called the Brush of Fame, because it turns out when I meet my idols, I become a giggly girl. And I don't know, it's probably anxiety. So when Metallica played Big Day Out, usually there's a whole bunch of dongers and everything backstage for the bands to hang out in, and they've got their own privacy and that. And it's called the Inner Sanctum. Well, it was. This time we had to build Metallica Land, and we had to do a perimeter fencing. They all had a container each, and then one in the middle. And then on the day, there was a huge line going from Metallica Land all the way down. And that's when I found out that they meet their fans wherever they go.
Oh, that's nice.
Oh, it was great, and I just sort of stood back and watched them, and they shook hands and signed and took photos, and that was really cool. And then just before they went on stage, backstage, there was like a limestone kind of staircase going down the grass hill, which then took you to the backstages of the Big Day Out. And I would just sit on the side and watch these legendary bands come on and off stage. And that would be my brush of fame. Now, when Metallica came down the stairs, they all were still practicing their licks and stuff on their guitars. And even Lars had his sticks they were warming up as they were coming out, And then they put on an amazing show. They were playing at the same time as the Flaming Lips on the other side.
Oh, that's a pity. Can I like them too?
Well, because I was privileged with the AAA, I could go in what they call no man's land and just go from one stage and just walk around to the other stage. So I was kind of watching them both at the same time. But after that Metallica concert at the Big Day Out, I was like, well, this is a band that has refined their craft quite well, And anyway, last band at the Big Day Out, and as soon as they finish, it's our job to bring down all the temp fencing, so then you guys can come and take all the sound away. And in the sea of cans and rubbish and everything, I found a plectrum belonging to the new bass player at the time, Robert
Trujillo or something?
Something like that.
Trujillo?
He played in Suicidal Tendencies before Metallica. And anyway, he hung out with us afterwards and was a nice, cool guy, The other lads were probably just in Metallica Land doing whatever they did there, But I came to realise that this band had been through so much over the years and just know exactly what to do on stage.
Yeah, well, that's how it got for me working with music. You sort of have to do all the right things to prepare, otherwise you're creating a problem possibly. But yeah, Big Day Out provided so many great moments, I'd say.
Yeah.
I think of a Lonely Polly. I walked past Lonely Polly. And she was lonely because the band was spread out so much. Polly Harvey, like the PJ Harvey.
Oh, PJ Harvey.
I call her Lonely Polly, just standing there in the middle and doing a great job. It was good music.
My first Big Day Out. My first Big Day Out was 1993, because that's when the Perth one came over.
Right.
And then I went to all of them, and then I started working for them in 2001. And that was at Bassendean Oval.
Yeah, the ovals kept changing, and when AC/DC played Subiaco, and when the Rolling Stones played Perry Lakes much earlier, basically everything was allowed, especially super high volume.
Sure.
And there was no problem with a whole lot of things. The AC/DC one was funny. At that moment, I wasn't that involved in anything, and I went to buy food in Subiaco, and I suddenly hear AC/DC as loud as clear, louder than if I had them on the stereo in the car, but they were outside. And I was about 5 blocks away. So I opened the window and I just listened to it, and I hear like little flicks of the fingers on the strings and a gurgle off the throat of the singer as if they're standing next to me, but it's 5 blocks away.
Wow.
So I realised now that the streets I went through had a lot of people sitting on the verge in little fold-out chairs holding beers.
Yeah.
They're all enjoying AC/DC. Now, my housemate at the time, Matty, had worked on the security for it, and he said, I had the earpiece with the security, and we could hear the EPA people outside the moment the band started saying, it's too loud, the volume's got to come down. And then the actual production manager of AC/DC got on it and said to the EPA people, just to all the EPA people worrying about the volume, we invite you to come inside and just enjoy the show.
Sure. Yeah. Well, there was that incident in the 80s when Pink Floyd came to town, offered the general public tickets to the show, or they would pay for their night out to, you know.
And people still complained about it.
People still complained.
I mean, what a unique moment. I was there. I was a stagehand for that.
Oh.
And that was just after I got to Perth and just after I left my overseas gigs. So I knew all the people in the crew. One of the things that they told me about that show, and was observable later, is that with a separate drums, guitars, bass, other people playing the same as what the actual Pink Floyd members played, they would leave the stage sometimes. And there'd be the projection and the film and the other band playing and the audience going, we're listening to Pink Floyd. But Pink Floyd would be backstage, 3 of them anyway, having a glass of port.
Yeah.
Typically English, English, because they didn't want to be showbiz. They didn't want to perform.
Well, at that
Instead,
stage,
they put the biggest show on ever, but it wasn't them having to do dancing.
Well, I think at that stage, Roger Waters wasn't in the band then.
Right.
It says here as well that you were a stagehand for David Bowie.
Yeah, but it was a Dutch show, and I was working for Mojo Concerts.
Okay.
And I spent most of my night in the roof, looking down on the stage.
Oh.
And I'm not sure, was that show where one of the guitarists, I don't know, I did David Bowie the same time as the Rod Stewart show there.
Yeah.
There was a guitarist who was the son of Hattie Jacks, and Hattie Jacks was a actress in the Carry On movies. But to get back to the sad part I was going to get to, Jerry and Jock. Jerry and Jock are men like me. When Jerry worked for Kevin Borich, he lugged the whole PA, the lights and the stage gear in by himself up the stairs if he had to. So I copied him. He was my example. I did that for Sweet Jane. Single man crew, starting at 11 in the morning. Only to be faced by the band at 8 o'clock at night saying, Rick, you forgot the drink stand. Where's the drink stand? Anyway, Jock preceded me in all the bands in Melbourne. He's very well known for being the sound engineer for the Joe Giuseppe and the Falcons.
Oh, yeah.
But I followed him in lots of other little jobs doing monitors for people. We all knew the same people. I went to England first and did really interesting work all over Europe through a company that is known as Britannia Row. I worked for Turbo Sound, but they hired out to Britannia Row, same thing. So then Jock Bain followed me there, and Jock Bain ended up working with the New Zealand counterpart and a Japanese one, and I was sort of jealous of him. And Jerry Georgettis became stage manager for the Chili Peppers, or production manager for the Chili Peppers. Did big shows in America. Both of them committed suicide.
Oh, really?
And that's where perhaps this talk is also important to know, that production people commit suicide 7 times more than the average population.
Why do you think that is?
It comes from not being part of something when you get home. I don't think they do it while they're on the road.
What do you mean?
Well, you come home to what?
Right.
Your partner's now seeing someone else, and your family doesn't know what you did, and sort of go, what you're out with the band, were you? Oh.
So you're away from home for too long, and things happen in the meantime.
Relationships and families aren't really there when you haven't been there for them.
That's one thing that Ace Frehley says in his biography and in this documentary, is that by the late 70s he was married with a child, and so was Peter Criss, but the other guys weren't, and he said that they were just workaholics, and he'd already spent so much time on tour, once they finish one tour, they go straight onto another one. Record music goes, and it becomes this
incompatible with the members of the band that are different,
and that is
different lives.
Yeah, and so even though two of them could endure that process, the other two couldn't. But they weren't given enough time off to party or whatever and let it all out, and instead there was no other sort of way, so they had to leave. There were other things involved as well. But I can, now that you bring it up, I never thought about the implications of touring and being away from family or loved ones for so long.
It's very heavy because when you get home, of course, you're also, this is the other thing, on the road you can be used to a lot of drugs, alcohol, and you can operate with that even and go, I can still do it.
In regards to sound production work, we're starting to get into the healthy and unhealthy habits of this industry. And as I said before, I had to take a break from production because if you're mixing bands, you live in pubs, you have access to free beer, you have access to cigarettes. But I wanted to sort of talk about that aspect of the job where there's so many hazards involved.
Well, before I started it, I had no idea other than that my parents thought that I was going to get lost on drugs.
Yeah, right.
After about 20 years, when I looked at all the deaths, they were all road deaths. There was no prevalence of drug deaths. There were 18 out of 20 were people that lost their lives on the road through lack of sleep.
Sleeping at the wheel.
Yeah, so I really blame the whole culture of doing overnight gigs. I remember seeing my late friend Pat Pickett pack up on a Sunday night outside the Seaview Ballroom in Melbourne, and he was packing up the band Spy vs. Spy.
Oh, I loved that band.
8-ton truck packed to the roof.
Right.
And he said, we're going to Sydney now, and we've been doing that for the last 5 weeks, say between Monday and Sunday and Monday. Sunday in Melbourne, Monday in Sydney. And that drive is 12 or 14 hours.
Yeah.
I've done it myself lots of times, but as an overnighter, that you can't do it without drugs, like you can't really not sleep and just keep going. And we did things like we had 2 full range tanks that would, I think they were 400k each, so you could have got 800 without stopping for fuel. And we literally opened the window to take a leak out the window.
Sure.
And we would also change drivers by shifting forward and have the other person drop in behind. So we wouldn't stop.
So there's just no stopping.
No.
Wow. But that's dangerous.
Yeah. At the time in the 70s, the Hume Highway had narrow bridges that were narrower than two trucks. And they were bendy roads, and you came around the hill, and there was the little bridge, and there was another truck coming its way.
Yeah.
And I have multiple times hit the other truck's mirror with my mirror.
Wow.
And slapped against mine.
That close.
Break. Yeah.
Wow.
Close. So complete take your life into your hands. Shit, that was.
Yeah.
And of my friends then, we lost a few, and it's incredibly painful to witness how people were dying from this culture, because it's not just an accident. No, I think the industry was set up to not have sleep in it. And we're all taking speed. Yeah, you can't do that forever either. So that was the first health problem. But of course, as you develop a relationship and you might want to keep a girl that doesn't run away, there's the next problem.
Right,
it doesn't.
relationships.
I mean, I basically went for probably 16 years or something, and for what I thought was a long-term relationship, like 2 or 3 years, but none of them lasted because when you get back, they've sort of found someone else. And, who can blame them in a way?
Yeah, well,
what sort of relationship
you're spending so much time away from home.
Yeah. So when I finally came to Perth, this is why I came to Perth, to stay with the one woman who I promptly married, and we were together for 6 years. how did it fall apart? I got back on the road again.
Oh, no.
How? Yeah, but I wasn't going to. For 5 years, I wasn't going to.
Yeah.
And then just something came up, and what that basically was is my grandmother was not well in Holland, and then she died. And that took a while, and 3 months or so. And then I thought, nah, but I bought a world ticket, and so I didn't have to go back the same way. I could go past America on the way home. In America, I got offered a job, and it was too good a job.
Yeah.
So I did another 3 months, and then by that time the marriage was over. It's really sad. But that already by then I was in Perth for about 5 years, and that made me fall in love with this city. So in this city I feel at home, and that is sort of the fluffy pillow I've got, because me teaching at TAFE is the result of having been here that long, so everyone knows me.
You've got some pretty cool names here on your list. Iron Maiden.
Yeah. Well, when I went to England in '83, I had spent a summer working concerts in Holland, staying with my dear grandma, and I asked any visiting Englishman and American where are the good places and who are the right companies. Is at Turbo Sound in London, that's what's going. So here I am at Turbo Sound, and I scored myself a gig after 2 weeks. I already scored a gig somewhere else when I got there, but then Turbo Sound, And they had just sold a whole lot of speaker boxes to Iron Maiden. And Iron Maiden were like a business. They were doing 50 weeks a year, 2 weeks off, and then back on 50 weeks a year.
Right.
And they were making so much money, they were trying to be out of England for like 40 weeks or something. They had to do lots of Europe, lots of America, because if they were in England too long, this is still the time when 98% of your money would go to the tax person.
Right.
There. I don't know if that stayed or whatever, but so what a band, Iron Maiden. I mean, they had great guitars. They had an amazing light show. I remember standing under lights, and I think it was 400 at the time. I think it grew to 800 lights, and there were 1,000-watt lamps. You turn them all at once, you would cook. They only turned some at the time on.
I was never an Iron Maiden fan back in the day because Bogans listened to Iron Maiden, and back in the day, Bogans beat people up. And they, it was a faction thing where, surfers listened to punk and Bogans listened to metal and that kind of thing. And so it was this really intimidating, culture, and I got picked on by Bogans quite a lot, and they always wore Iron Maiden t-shirts. But I always loved the artwork of Iron Maiden. I never got into the music. I was more into punk and alternative stuff. But then they came to town about 5 years ago, and they didn't sell out the arena.
Oh.
And so they dropped their tickets down to $40. And so I bought two and took a friend with me. And we witnessed one of the most incredible rock and roll shows. Now, by this time, the band had been around for at least 30, 40 years?
Mid-70s.
Something like that. Rock and roll demons possessed by some sort of higher force to do these 15-minute solos, and then bang, next guy, 15-minute solo. I'm exaggerating, but it was just non-stop rock. And the theatrics and everything. They had, one of the most impressive things was that they're all fit as fuck still to this day, and one of the guitarists was doing yoga with his leg up on a Marshall stack while he was playing a solo, but they had these Bruce Dickinson would run around the back of the stage and pull the new backdrop. They had all these backdrops, like old theatre backdrops,
right,
but Iron Maiden style. There was so much involved, but the thing is, the sound was great. There was so much power coming from that stage, but whoever was mixing did a great job. So we watched, 2 hours of Iron Maiden, and then we went down the road to a little local gig in a little local pub, and my friend came off stage, and I said, I just watched Iron Maiden, and you're louder.
Yeah, you can.
You know?
In a small place, you can be very loud.
No.
In fact, all little gigs are louder than big concerts. I love music where the vocals sit in the music.
Yeah.
And I don't like the vocals to be out front. To me, the vocals are out front for Tom Jones or Engelbert Humperdinck. But when it's rock and roll, you put them in the music.
Sure.
And I try to get this from places where Rock and Handy plays, the band that I'm in, that occasionally sing in, but the main singer is the bass player. Any phone thing from any gig has the vocals right up front and the band soft.
Right.
So for a while I did ask, can we bury the vocals in the band? But then I just don't bother, because even if I say that, they don't get it.
Yeah.
So the what do you call it? The tension of the singing is a reaction to the torrent of noise you supposedly make on drums and guitar. Now we're toning the torrent of noise down to make the mixing easier, but it doesn't mean that they don't have the opportunity to do that.
Well, there's also look, from a performance point of view, is like, if you're first up, you get a sound check. Yeah. If you're second, third,
Yeah, you miss out.
you miss out. And I've never been opposed to playing first for that reason.
Yeah.
But you don't play to as many people. That's
And back to Iron Maiden.
okay.
Iron Maiden bought turbo sound equipment, but it still wasn't enough. They bought 60 cabinets or something. Sometimes they needed 100. So that was my job, to come out from London in a little truck with the added speakers, either shows in Europe and also shows over England, like NEC Birmingham, to a big place, add the speakers, and I'd see the show again. I wouldn't mix it, but I'd hang the extra speakers, walk the stage doing it. The most impressive part was Eddie the Monster. Eddie the Monster was a stage roadie who, his feet were at the knees of the monster. So his foot was about this high.
Oh, yeah,
so it was a big sort of lower part of the leg. You can imagine how high that was. But the head was way above his head as well. I mean, he was looking through the stomach. And then the arms that were sort of swaying had plastic chains. So he had plastic chains. It weighed nothing because it was big enough. And then I've never seen him fall over. Probably did at some point.
Yeah, they had a version like that of Eddie at the show I saw, and then they had inflatables. Now, there's a name here that I really need to mention, Miles Davis.
Well, again, I have a bit of a different angle in that my first two shows that I saw were the Faces and the Slade, and I didn't like them. Oh, careful now, Rick. Everybody loves Miles Davis. But I did a show at the Bercy in Paris with my friend Roger Barrett, who owned a large company in England with, again, turbo sound equipment, and that's why I was there, to hang that. 18,000 people. And Gil Evans was supporting, another big jazz name, and then Miles Davis. American crew on stage. I remember they put some of the microphones backwards, and he said, and when we pointed it out, they said, "Oh, it's not my gig, man." They had no sense of humour about their mistakes either. And anyway, so Miles Davis played Time After Time by Cyndi Lauper. But he plays one big bad note in the middle of it. You go, that's not right.
Oh.
But I did a number of shows with him, and it was always there. And I suspected myself that he was giving the finger to his own audience, going, you bunch of sycophantic,
Right.
take this and see what you make of it.
Right.
That's what I thought.
Okay.
They were, of course, he's got a very recognisable tone, and they were good concerts. And the reason why we were there was because he played that Montreux one. What was that called again? The yearly one in Montreux.
Jazz Festival.
Yeah, that's it. And, when he did that, as it happened, my English friend with the sound company, Star Hire, I think, happened to do the sound there that year. Probably because Bose got the sack the year before. Bose used to use that as an advertising thing, but no one actually liked what the sound was.
Oh.
So my friend Roger did the sound for Miles Davis, and ever since he was the one that did them all in Europe, everywhere, because Miles had finally found someone that he liked.
Oh.
And on that subject, I bought a DVD of my favourite artist, Leonard Cohen, and Leonard Cohen toured Europe around 1970. He had very successful first two records out already, but he toured with a totally incompetent sound crew. And if you look at the history of 1970, the Rolling Stones were probably somewhere, touring America, 69. And other big bands were touring perhaps with a few good sound crews, Led Zeppelin. but they had run out of good crew by the time Leonard Cohen went out.
Right.
And Leonard Cohen, of course, is folk music, friends singing along this far away from the microphone, strumming a nylon acoustic. And on this DVD, there's not one song that actually makes it. There's feedback in every song.
Oh.
And it's a DVD with a dove of peace on the front, drawn by Picasso. Beautiful cover. So Leonard Cohen has to do this gig, and literally in the middle of the song, the PA will go, beep, 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 and then there was a scene in the movie, in the DVD, where they're in the dressing room with the two sound guys who sit there like Beavis and Butthead, and he says, "What was that?" And the guy goes, "Well, that was Bill. I told him not to plug the headphones in there. He did it anyway, and look what happened." And you go, this is so surreal, awful.
Sure.
You'd expect that after a little pub gig with your two cousins on the sound, but not at this level. This is for... And also there was visions of him walking backstage and people saying, "We want our money back." And he actually get his wallet out. He goes, "I think I only got $20.
The thing about working behind the scenes is that you witness things that you don't expect, I suppose.
Yeah, it's not quite what you think beforehand. Also, I have done a lot of sound for people I didn't actually know. I just saw it. And one thing I was going to mention for sure in this interview is that it's a privilege to be part of a certain tribe. As a sound person, it's like immediately being promoted to something that normally would take years to achieve, being a trusted part of a group. And this group can have a completely different taste in music than you, and a completely different culture than yourself, and you get to see them all. In fact, all the different cultures that I've done sound for all make disparaging remarks about each other as well. But I know them all, and I find that in Perth, I've been in a real privileged position to do sound for the hippie people in Freo, the commercial cover bands that work the pubs, the jazzy people that, probably now connected to the Whopper or the Ellington or so on, and the sometimes international people that go in and out of here. And they're all completely different tribes. As an observer of gigs at the Fly, where I was sound person for 12 and a half years, I think, at the Fly, sometimes we had a gig and everyone in the audience didn't seem to be part of the same tribe. And what that was is they were Triple J listeners. They don't normally meet anywhere, and they all looked like they didn't know anyone, and they stayed with their friend or partner or alone, but there wasn't the feeling of we're all in it together at all. Augie March, they would get that sort of audience.
Oh, okay.
You go, what a weird separate audience this is.
I just want to... The Fly was the Fly-By nightclub in Fremantle.
Yep.
Yes, I remember the Fly well.
It was a confusing name because it had nightclub at the end, and it continuously had to be explained that it wasn't a nightclub. It was the name given to a place that used to be a place where cadets for the Air Force were trained, and it had a plane out the front.
It was a hangar?
But that it wasn't. It looked like it.
Oh.
So there was a plane out the front. They trained cadets, Air Force cadets. So when the musicians were given this space to start their music club, they called, Fly. But the nightclub, they were never a nightclub.
I just want to mention a band here that you've got, and that's Culture Club.
Yeah, well, Culture Club was South English, south of London, and were given to, I think, a man called Nick Atkins to mix. Nick Atkins came to Turbo Sound before me, and he scored the gig in a local pub with a little PA system. But by golly, they got signed. They were the biggest thing. So by the time I got there, 83, 84, they ruled. And what I did shows with was the big ones. We did the Wembley, not Wembley Stadium, but Wembley Empire Pool, which is again 18,000 or so, or 16,000, similar to our arena. The Empire Pool was a pool, so it's got a deck of what used to be holes, and now it's got the seats on top of it. There's a certain resonance associated with that underneath.
Okay.
And then it is so long that the back really needs extra speakers. So you hang a delay stack that is delayed to be in time with what comes off the stage, making it quite complicated. So we put all that in there, and Nick was still the mixer, but by now, this is what I was so jealous of that guy. If he ever hears this, he'd laugh. When the band got given an advance, he said, but we need some sound equipment, boys. How about you lend me that money and I will pay it back to you, but let's buy some sound gear. So he got these racks, and like the Turbo Sound that I worked for was all amplifiers and speakers, but they didn't really have desks or electronics. Well, he had all the electronics that went next to the rack, all the effects, all the gates, compressors, and whatever fruit you could get. And it was the best that was possibly made, which meant that when Culture Club wasn't playing, he could rent that out to other people at big dollars.
Sure.
So he paid them off within a year, and then he owned all that stuff.
He owned it all. Good.
He owned about $100,000 worth within a year without it having to actually spend any money. Oh, he was lucky.
Yeah.
He went on to mix Prince after that.
Oh, okay.
Anyway, that band was so popular when I was in England, and to me I had all these 70s bands that I loved. Free, I loved Free.
Free are great.
Bad Company, and now it's Culture Club. And, the guy had a great voice. As soul music, I do appreciate soul music. He had a great soul voice.
He does have a soulful, very warm kind of voice.
He's also quite tall. I mean, I was in dressing rooms where he stuck out a head above me. I thought, you can't see that from a distance.
No. That band was pretty revolutionary at the time, not so much for their music, but for their gender. Like it was, it was this sort of...
Slowly, the whole fashion at the time became androgynous. There was a guy called Marilyn. That was the other one.
Yeah.
And, that made it more acceptable to, at the time, it was still very much early days. But
Dead or Alive, that guy as well.
He passed away. I went to the gym with the keyboard player at the time, Dead or Alive.
Oh, did you?
Yeah, but anyway, that sort of androgynous thing now is so popular almost that I see at TAFE, in every 100 students, there's at least 5 that are in that category now.
Yeah.
They probably were before, but they weren't showing it, but they're happy to show it now.
Yeah. Today, those things are all quite relaxed and acceptable now.
People don't judge. I think that nobody should judge somebody else for what they want to be, and they have no idea what it's like.
No, but I remember, growing up and Culture Club breaking into the mainstream, and I wasn't really into the music, but the whole image kind of was very confusing for young heterosexual boys, I suppose. And
girls love the fashion, and I must say the 80s girls' fashion, I didn't like it at all. The duck-ass haircuts, blah. I was so happy when Britney Spears got popular. They got pretty again.
Yeah, fashion and haircuts in the 80s weren't...
shoulder pads?
Shoulder pads and stuff like that.
Standing by the stage with Culture Club, I listened to the guitar and it would go chink-a-chink, and I thought, that's not what you want to do with a guitar, go chink-a-chink. But it was their version, sort of funk soul guitar playing. There's not a dirty sound in sight there, and there's lots of keyboards. And the one thing worth noticing about Culture Club is they had just toured the USA when I worked with them. It was a big show in London, homecoming show perhaps, and they had an American lady doing the video mixing. Now, I think that was a company based in Dallas, Texas. I think it was Shoko, and they were big in everything, sound, lighting, and this time it was videoing. So what that involved was, I think, 8 cameras. On either side there was cranes, skinny cranes that would get right in front of people on stage. And to the side of the building almost, I think she was in another room, but I've also done gigs with her right up at the same places where the mixing was a lady with all these little screens and mixing the video.
Video mixing.
Yeah. And I'm a great fan of live DVDs, and since then I haven't seen any live DVDs as good as what she did then in 1985,
wow.
86.
Okay.
And they showed me their box. They had like a rack-mounted box that was 4 units high, and they said, it's £100,000. And with that, they could sort of twist the screen and spin it away in a horrible, grainy 80s fashion.
Yeah.
This is it was just after MTV started. It's like early MTV's video style. I'm no fan of videos in general, but this lady had learned the show. She'd done 50 shows by the time I saw her work, and she was able to cut to just the right bit on the stage every time. Nothing was missed. Solos weren't missed, but also moments where people looked like interesting. They were all there, and then held a little bit, and then perfectly tastefully done. While a normal video, they get someone to come along for one night and try and hack it together later on. They should get them on tour. Just like a live mixer gets better and better, and the lights get better and better, that actual thing with the video screens would have been so much better if they made live DVD videos with the person who was on tour with them being the director.
Yeah, absolutely, I agree. I used to do a lot of VJing, video jockey,
Yeah.
But what you're describing is early technology and early stages or early foundations of that VJing.
I did notice that by 85, 86, the cameras were only this big, which made me think that no band should ever go to the cameras. The cameras should always come to the band.
Sure.
We were like multi-truck tours, with the tour that took many semi-trailers, and the whole video equipment arrived in a high-ace van. So for that reason, I've got a huge problem with taking a band that could be doing a concert and putting them in a TV studio.
Right.
The television, what they like to do is the weight of, yes, we are going to give you to the masses. Millions of people will see this. Now do as we're told.
Right.
So what time do you normally get up? 2 in the afternoon. Let's make that 5 in the morning. Okay. And then, by the way, we'd like you to just set up and then wait. Set up, wait. Set up, wait. Oh, you like to play to an audience? Well, the audience is there, but you can't quite see them. There's this enormous field of free moving cameras, and then there's the audience there. You can't see their faces. Really handy when they do that to comedians, the fuckers.
Oh.
Anyway, so now sound. We can't have all that sound that you have at concerts, but we have a little speaker here on the floor if you want to hear what you're doing.
Right. They approach it very differently.
Well, the whole focus, and also they want to tell the band when to start. Where I am from, the band comes on like it's a pregnancy. The baby's going to get born now.
Yes.
Or no, not yet, but now. And it's not about someone doing this like a trick. See, the television think that you've got a little trick where you do a little dance and you can do it now. No, the band is actually a feeling. It's an unstoppable feeling.
Yeah.
One of the best starts I saw in Perth in 89 was U2.
Oh.
And U2 started like the Rattle and Hum movie. And what they did is they played Streets with No Name, which is sort of a beginning that sort of explodes into a full sound.
Yep.
And as the sound is sort of still at the beginning, there was just flashes of light from the stage. The band wasn't all that visible. And as the song blossoms in its beginning, multicoloured lights go on the audience. Put the hairs on the back of my neck. I've seen so many shows by then, probably 4,000 shows already. And I saw that and I went, it's genius to make the audience realise this is us. This concert we're not the focus, we're all in it together, and you guys are as important as we are, and that's how they lit up the audience at the start.
So I like U2, but I never got around to seeing them. Let's keep going down the list here, and I'm just going to name drop George Thorogood and Destroyers.
George Thorogood was a big hero of mine. When his first album came out, it was on Festival Records, and my girlfriend was the promotions lady for Festival Records. I got an early copy. I wanted that guitar. I got to America and I got that guitar. It's an ES125.
Okay.
And when George Thorogood eventually came to Australia many years later, I got him to sign it. And he wanted to buy it off me as well.
Did he?
Because he had 20 of them, and that one was most like his first, which he still had.
That's a great first album. The one that I got hooked on was the live album that came out in the 80s.
Yeah, awesome stuff. So I did sound for I worked for the sound company, didn't mix them, but put up the PA, did the gig, saw it all in front of me, and learned a lot from the stage guy. What was the stage? There was a guy looking after the guitars, right? And some of these guitars are painted white, and others look creamy, and in the original, from the original album, is the original sort of red-yellow burst. And I say, what's the thing with the different colours? He says, before I got to work for George, he had already 4 of them painted white with polyurethane paint. And he says, that chokes the sound. And that's why it looks so perfectly white too. He says, what we've done since is we made them with with nitrocellulose paint, which is more friendly to a good sound.
Wow.
And that also makes them slightly more creamy, yellowy looking. And he says, we get these real cheap. He goes, we don't even buy the ones with the cutaway, because this is a ES5 125, and there's a C in it and a T. T means thin and a C means cutaway.
Cutaway, yeah.
And the cutaway, if it's not on the guitar is a lot cheaper. He says, we just cut that in, put a bit of wood in it, and then paint it white so you can't tell.
Oh, wow. So they customise it.
Yeah, he had more than 10. I think it was even 20 of them. Like, that probably tells you it's a problem that I've got as well with those bloody guitars. So it didn't hold that tune for me, but all Gibsons, where they fan out on the headstock, that's not really a great design, but the sound of them is so good you want to persist.
Right.
But he probably has that many because he keeps handing them to him and making sure they're in tune.
Oh, well, yeah, exactly. But that's funny how, like, the paint affects the sound.
Polyurethane is like a layer of plastic on the paint, and it's a plastic paint. Nitrocellulose hardens. Nitrocellulose is what they put on violins, and that shell, one reason for it is if you damage it, you could just fix it up a little bit and blend it in. On polyurethane, you have to do the whole thing again.
Right.
So the old instruments all had finishes that you can just patch it a little bit, you couldn't see it, it would blend in.
Wow. Let's go to another contrast here. Bill Clinton and Ross Perot, 1992 election campaign.
Yeah, I think Ross Perot was a real right-wing guy, and Bill Clinton was a Democrat, I guess. But see, I don't know nothing about politics.
No.
I ignore it. I'd switch it away as fast as sport on the media. I don't like either of them. But I'm in America. I'm with a sound system that has just done Frank Sinatra. And what had happened was that we just kept going after our tour. No more Frank Sinatra, but now election events. And the election events were in the last throes of Bill Clinton's soon-to-be president campaign. And what I learned from that, I learned a lot from that. For a start, we did enormous audiences, 70,000. We did not just one delay stack, not just 2, 3, 4 delay stacks, all the way back. You know, like you see those enormous political speeches.
Yes.
The company that really does that in America is called Maryland Sound.
Okay.
But I'm sure Maryland Sound was everywhere, but runs out of gear somewhere. So the company I was with was from Cleveland, and they're called 8 Day Sound. People make all sorts of reasons for that. It's got 8 Day Sound. Is it religious?
Religious.
No. There was a florist called 8 Day Florist, and he just named his sound company.
That's usually how it works. There's no great meaning behind many happy accidents.
It sort of makes people wonder. So 8 Day Sound was the second biggest sound company in the world. They still are. When the new PA system from France started to dominate the world, which is a line array built by a VDOS line array built by L Acoustics, he said to them, I would like to order 1,000 of those cabinets. And they were only producing about 200 a year.
Yeah.
He kept them going for 2 years. Nobody else could buy the bloody things.
Wow.
That's the power of 8 Day Sound.
Sure.
I used to drive him and his kids to school, and he'd be on the phone next to me, the man Tom Arco who ran it. And he was talking about tours, and it was 2 million at the time.
Wow.
And I just thought, this is such a different world. Bill Clinton had to go to places where his voting could be in danger, where he could possibly lose. So Bill Clinton would go to an airport and have an event at the airport. So he wouldn't have to drive a car all the way in the city. It literally, you'd see him, I'd be at the airport as well with my big PA and everything, and you'd see this little car come out of a plane, and there he was, 200 metres. And the audience would be there all day. They go, Bill Clinton's going to talk, but it would take 7 hours. They have all these local politicians, but they had bands in between. So they're bands. So I never knew what any of this was. I'd seen it in Australia on TV, but what you actually see is all these people with these placards, and they have these hats that look like Uncle Sam, like red and white.
Red, white, blue.
Yeah. And you'd think the whole place is like that. No, you'd see a camera, and a camera goes there, and they go, whoa, and wherever the camera is there, suddenly all the red, white, and blue comes out, and the rest is dead as a doornail. Anyway, the thing that I really thought was funny is that my sound from my desk would go into a splitter that goes 12 ways for the press. but not for these. It went to 12 ways, and that went into another 12 splitters. So I had 144 outlets.
Wow.
So one of the satisfaction was you'd be in your hotel at night, and the news would come on. You go, "That's my sound," because all those splitters were transformer isolated. So typical camera crew don't know much about sound. Can I plug in here? And what they plug in there is a phantom-powered socket that's meant to go in a phantom-powered mic.
Yep.
If they do that to your desk could blow up.
Yeah, right.
If they do it to a non-isolated output, they would knock out everybody else listening to the same thing. But instead with little transformers in between. So Bill Clinton would come on, and this platform with all these malt boxes, suddenly from the ground came cameras and a person and blocked the entire view to the guy, to the whole 70,000, other than the few hundred people between them and the front. So perfect clear picture for the news, camera straight, same height as him. Behind him we waited all day to see our candidate, and now I can't see them.
Oh my God.
And of course I did the last few days of the election campaign. It sounded like this. It was really hard. You didn't have a voice left.
I bet.
And one thing he said, and I heard him say it multiple times, he says, "I don't know if becoming a president of the USA makes any difference, but I'm going to find out."
Right. How about the legendary Frank Sinatra?
Well, when I was a kid, I heard "Strangers in the Night," and I thought that was all right. But, of course, I was a Beatles fan, and I read somewhere that he did something, and he said, "Oh, this is the best song Lennon McCartney ever wrote." And you go, "Yeah, great. That was the George Harrison one, Frank." I didn't pay that much attention. Yeah, something.
Yeah.
So I wasn't a fan of Frank Sinatra. But, of course, to put it on your resume, that's pretty good. So this is the net result of me being friends with Tom Arco. He says, "You want to go out with Frank for a while?" I was basically saying, "Hey, I'm from Australia. I'm here to do whatever you want me to do. I need to learn," and put me out on that. So Frank Sinatra was doing North America, and we only really did the right-hand side of America, so the Chicago to New York. And there were a few different orchestras, like the way that he worked at the time. It was only Harry Connick Jr. who had a jazz big band at the time. This was a jazz big band and a classical orchestra. And it's about 30 people in one and probably 40 in the other. So it's like a lot of people there that all need microphones. So I would hang the sound system in places between 10 and 20,000 people. And then sound system in the air, I'd start marking up the band. That was my job. At the sound check, I wouldn't be at the desk. I would be in the band, just listening to what it all sounded like and fixing up things that didn't work. So the jazz band was playing all the standard jazz things, his hits and that, but I suddenly got what that was. As a kid, I heard all that on the radio, but it was overtaken by the British pop music thing. But a real jazz band that goes pa-da, bap, 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 and it has all that aggression and all the dynamics that often the recordings squash. Fuck, that was good. I sort of got a respect for the jazz band. And then the classical orchestra was very sweet. Of course, a lot of ballads. And I love harps. I love big harps. Yeah. So there was the big harp. And there's a friendly lady, and I've got two microphones, and we've got the shorter channels, but we've got harp. It's important, two microphones. Let's where do I stick mics on a harp? So I learned that, right? It's not easy. They've got a sound chamber at the bottom there, and get it to sound good out the front. But every night I would walk around as well, because during the show I wasn't in the orchestra, and I go, I want to hear what that harp sounds like now. 5-10 shows, never heard the harp.
Wow.
And then I realised that every night Frank Sinatra Jr., who was in fact the band leader and the piano player, would walk out the door arm in arm with the harp lady. And then I read somewhere how he was married as well.
Oh, okay.
So there was a lady in the band who played the harp, who was his girlfriend. And yes, she could play the harp, but there was in fact no songs at the moment that required any harp.
But, okay. Good for her.
Yeah. Now the drummer in the support act, which is Shirley MacLaine, he was Cubby someone who was once a Mouseketeer. He was from the original Mouseketeers.
Wow.
Now he's a full-on jazz drummer, great drummer.
Yeah.
And The sound man for the support act for Shirley MacLaine was a guy called Randy Faustino, and he was the brother of David Faustino, who was cubby in the Bundy Married with Children.
Oh.
So these are all people related with showbiz some way.
Yeah.
And Shirley MacLaine was, she's such an aware person and all that, but I only experienced her as someone who upset everyone. She would come in and they would be like, the old 60 music. She got the full both bands, just like Frank. She was the support, old friend of course. And she would walk on and her foot would touch something on the lino and goes, "What's this?" And there'd be a little bump under the lino.
Just a tiny little...
Yeah. And she goes, that can we fix that? And she would just leave the stage again.
Wow.
And they'd have to move all the shit off, lift this shit up, find this little pebble that's under there, take it off, and then she'd come back. 20 minutes later, she'd come on and she'd go, "Oh, there's a sound I can hear. I think it's air conditioning. Can we just fix that?" And of course, the air conditioning is done by a guy who's got a key, but he's not there at the moment. And we're talking about 60-piece orchestra waiting. And normally you just go and stand on your pebble and listen to the air conditioning and get off in 4 minutes. But now, she could be an hour and a half.
Wow. And
there'd be a guy on the side with a big quiff and hairspray who looked like, like Liberace or something, with a little towel over his arm standing by the side of the stage, who would proudly walk behind her wherever she went. And I thought, what fucking puppet show is this?
Oh my God.
Well, Frank was different in that he never showed up before. He only showed for the gig. I've never talked to him. I talked to Frank Jr.
Oh, okay.
Frank Jr. was there when we were setting up. And,
right.
Not that I made a big deal of it.
So he was your first point of contact?
For the band, yeah. And his whole band, his jazz band, not the classical part, would go into Vegas and perform night after night, all the hits by his dad, and he would sing them. So that way the whole band was completely road ready whenever Dad wanted to join him. Dad was 72 at the time, and he could actually sing with a totally rehearsed band, care of his son.
Wow. And
in sound checks, his son sang, held the microphone.
Yep.
Now, that same microphone in the hands of his dad would sometimes get dipped in the Jack Daniels and water it was, and he dipped the whole bloody microphone in there and sort of splashed the crowd with it.
Bless the crowd.
Yeah. And they literally had to go to different brands of microphone to find one that didn't crap out when he did that again.
I have one Frank Sinatra album that I got from an op shop ages ago. It's in really good nick, and it's recorded so well.
Oh, well, this is one of my favourite things about him. There's a moment on YouTube in a song is called "It Was a Very Good Year," which I only got to understand as I got older myself.
Sure.
It's about having a relationship that didn't last, but it was a beautiful year.
Yeah.
Anyway, he sings this in a studio with a live orchestra, but the whole thing for real has been filmed by a documentary crew. And it was just a 7:30 report in the evening that wanted a bit on his recording. It Was a Very Good Year is the name of the song, and the documentary was made in 1965. Now, in 1965, the Beatles were about to be recorded by Jeff Emmerich with lots of compression. The compression was partly because all the mics were real close to the toms, close to the guitars.
Oh.
It was a new sound that everybody wanted. The studios were drier because you can add reverb later, but not for Frank. Frank was used to recording in radio studios that were big wooden husks that sounded fantastic, like not as slow as a church, but it had reverberation in it. So when Capitol Records, his record company, built that thing at the end of Hollywood and Vine in LA, they made this building that looked like a stack of records, the headquarters of Capitol Records. It looks like.
Oh, yeah.
Now, in there was studios who were very happy to report that their reverb now came from sending a sound to a speaker in the basement and a microphone back up, and that way the engineers could record it dry and add reverb later. So Frank went in there. He had photos taken with the microphone that said Capitol Records and his hat.
Mm-hmm.
But every time he walked in there, with the whole orchestra waiting and rehearsed, he walked out again, not recorded anything. That happened 4 times in the 50s. So this is the famous recording studios where Frank recorded. No, he didn't. he went back to the radio studios and then built his own.
Oh.
And the one that he built was called Western Recorders, and it's still being used today. The other thing that's interesting about all of this, New York, New York by Frank Sinatra is recorded in New York, but in the competing recording company studios. Basically the place where a lot of great recordings from the 50s and 60s came from was an Armenian church called 30th Street Recording Studios. It was CBS.
Wow.
And that studio was hired by Frank under an assumed name with his Italian recording engineer who was always there, and they recorded New York, the song,
wow.
When you make it there, you make it anywhere. But anyway, back to this one in California, and the news crew comes in and they go through a recording studio, and there's all these recording guys, which I sort of identify with, and there's about 5 recording systems going. There's a mono one, there's a stereo one, there's a 3-track one, and that's doubled up as well, and they're all going. Anyway, the camera goes through to this room, and there's a whole orchestra there, and there's Frank. But Frank has got a little side thing with a little stand with all his friends sitting there on a little stacked seating thing, and they sit there as an audience. There's about 12, 15 people there, and he sings in a microphone. Now, what would you normally like to be a Frank microphone? I'd say a condenser, a large frame condenser. No, he's got a small diaphragm dynamic. Where would you like him to sing? Well, near enough so it doesn't pop. He's about this far away. And it's a dynamic mic. It's an AKG. And there's an orchestra. And then the camera pans to the left, and my God, there's a sound system there as big as a pub PA. So what is his version of recording? We'll have the orchestra, I'll have an audience, and my microphone has to be amplified in the room so I can hear it and no one's wearing headphones.
Wow.
Now, if you go to any recording engineer these days and say, I want to record a singer with a classical orchestra, no headphones, no overdubs, and a PA in there, not just a wedge, a fucking PA for the vocals, they all go, you're crazy. Now listen to the song that they record on the spot. Not only that, the camera crew is there as the take is recorded. It's not like miming to something. No, that's it. It's breathlessly beautiful, and the people that do it, they can work with it. They can work around it. And to me, that is an example of what I've tried to do all my life.
Yeah, right.
Work with whatever they want, even though it's technically a fucking challenge. But listen to, it was a very good year, and it still can make me cry.
Yeah.
That's how good it was. In 87, I came back from overseas. In fact, this is my fork in the road. In late 86, I was out with Metallica. I came through Seattle, and on a sort of a place where there was a big venue here and a big venue there with 100 metres in between, I walked across the road straight into a Huey Lewis sound check. And the guy who was doing Huey Lewis's sound, I think his name was Richard, but I've forgotten it now.
Sure.
He said, Rick, do you want to do our support? We're just starting this tour. We've got a sound guy doing that guy on the piano there, and it's just terrible. And I said, yeah, but it's true. I am finishing in a couple of days, and I could do it, but I haven't seen my mum for 3 years, so I'm going to go to New Zealand. But that was Bruce Hornsby. Bruce Hornsby won an armful of Grammys at the end of the year, and to celebrate, he toured around America, taking the fledgling Crowded House with him as a support act.
Oh.
If I would have been on that, I would have been the Crowded House sound person, and with that, I could have come to Australia as well. There's Rick Vanderbilt, but instead, I went to see my mum. I went quickly past Melbourne to shift some of my belongings in different storage, and there was an old girlfriend. And she sort of got me, and I stayed. And that was the woman I came to Perth with.
Oh, okay.
So in 87, I was there for a few months, and I did Sound for Survival, who were a cover band. I learned something from Survival. Survival, with their little cassette decks, would tape off the radio the popular song of the week, take it to the sound check on Saturday, which was purposely a 2-hour-long rehearsal, really. Normally I don't do rehearsals at sound checks with this band, or they were paid me lots of money too. And anyway, so here they are, all huddled around this cassette deck going, so we do this song or that song. They pick 2 songs out of about a dozen that they got that week, and they listen and go, oh yeah, and then they'd play a pretend version of it. The singer would go, ooh, and not even know the words, and the band would sort of, often they didn't have the intro because it got missed when they hit the cassette deck.
Oh.
And they'd play that in front of 1,500 people.
Right.
And the crowd would go, yeah, da, 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 da. But there was usually one that went well and one that was bleh. And that one that went well, they spent the next week learning.
Right.
You do 50 weeks of that, you got 50 new songs every year, and that's what they were on.
Wow.
They were great. They did like that Steely Dan reeling in the years perfectly. All that stuff's not easy. And the singer, he had a house. And the band, as they got somehow poorer and sort of in trouble in personal lives, all ended up staying with him in his house. Till the end, they all paid rent to him.
Oh.
He paid him a wage for being in a band and then took half of it back again in the rent.
To supply accommodation.
He was last seen in New York City as an investor, yeah.
And apparently the venue burnt down.
Well, yeah, this is the Palace Disco. There's the Palais, which is the theatre, which is still fortunately there, which is like a big old opera house. And then the Palace was a lower building. I did Sound for Allegiance supporting the band Fight with that singer Rob Halford from Judas Priest. Yeah, I did that in there, and that was great because I was already in Perth and I met all my old friends from Melbourne because they're all metalheads. And that was in '87. That was the disco to go to on a Friday night. They had something that a lot of venues should have. They had a room where the band was, and then around it were rooms with windows where you could see it, but the noise wouldn't be in there.
Oh.
So, hey, you can go out, say you're going to see a band, but you can actually have a talk and stand up there. Load way more people in there. They make more money out of the drinks, while at the same time the people down below are having a great time too. That's how a good venue should be. And like right now, when you put your camera up in a venue, often you have to look up to the stage. But of course, when it's like that, you can easily find camera positions. You look down, so you get all that sort of flexibility as well.
Oh, yeah. Well, that makes sense.
It takes more real estate. I wonder if the fire was a real one or one of those again. It's often an insurance job, isn't it?
On some occasions, yes, and then on other occasions, it's just complete stupidity or neglect.
But any venue that has been a venue for a long time, like we had the Capitol Theatre here in Perth, should never be destroyed. It should be just. They shouldn't have destroyed the entertainment centre. You should be able to go by there and go, I used to go.
Well, they probably should have just fixed it up or just upgraded it.
Yeah, I think the way I understood it, it was owned by the man who owns Channel 7. And he wanted to sell it to the government and they could do it up. But the government didn't want to pay the price. So in the end, and this was money that was less than $10 million.
Yeah, yeah.
Now guess how much the arena cost? $450 million. So,
and it looks unfinished.
Squash beer can is what they call it. Yeah.
Squash beer can, yeah. The first gig I saw at the arena was Robbie Williams.
Was it good?
It was great. And I was very impressed with the arena and the staging and all the production. Someone took me, I had free ticket, and I wasn't really a Robbie Williams fan, but I really enjoyed that show.
You get the best of English skills there. I'm sure the crew had nothing but winners.
Oh.
And I saw him at the entertainment centre as a loader, coming in for the loadout, and he was still going.
Right.
And he was doing that song Angels, I think. Is it called Angels?
Don't know.
And, 6,000 girl voices sang along with him. And I thought, yeah, the entertainer, that's him.
He was such a great entertainer. And it was a bit of a sort of crooner theme, But his band were great, and the stage was 3 tiers. He had a rear projection. It was pretty good. But I was really impressed with the arena and how it pulled off such a great gig. But the aesthetics of the building...
The inside is better than the outside, but there's still a but. A proscenium arch, which is like a fake sort of top and sides in a theatre, is what the old entertainment centre had. Not many of them did. The design of that building, I've worked in many buildings like that around the world that have the same design, but whether it has a proscenium arch or not depends. What that did was that it put a PA and a band in front of a hole with a curtain in front of it. So behind that was a loading bay. So the bass that comes from the back of the PA, because bass is always going out in a circle. These days they're trying to make it directional, but there's bass from the back of the PA. Would go through this hole, go in the loading bay, and when it came back it was severely reduced. Because of the railway, the arena has a back wall, and the bass hits the back wall and comes straight back at you.
Oh, yeah.
So unless you can somehow technically get around that, and you can't really, bass on the stage will still do that, because that won't be directional. And you have an unevenness. See, when the bass hits the back wall and it comes out of a speaker, there's spots where they combine perfectly and it's slightly louder, but there's also ones where they combine imperfectly and it's slightly less loud. So if you walk from left to right in a venue or from top to bottom, you're going to have all these different amounts of bass. And I find that if the bass is like 4 dB louder or softer, I have a big opinion about that. I probably have an opinion about 1 dB louder bass, but these things can get up to 6 dB louder because of the wall interacting. So that's the thing.
That reminds me when I saw REM play one of their last tours at the Burswood Dome, the back wall thing, you could hear the sound hitting, like splatting against the wall and coming back.
The Burswood Dome, yeah, and that's one I'm not worried about that they knocked down. I was there in the first show. Like I'd just come to Perth and I was at Audex next door to Tower Lighting, and together with that crew, we went to the actual gig of Mick Jagger playing there. And Mick Jagger, next day in the press, was all about that sounded awful, can I have my money back? And what I heard was a severe slapback that made that most of the audience just heard it sound like this. That's what it was. And after that, they put a false roof in of sort of material that took it down a little bit. But before Mick Jagger even, when I walked in there with Keith Crammond from Audex, wonderful man, by the way, used to run a great sound company. He talked to me, as we are talking now, about 1.5 meters apart. And after a few seconds, the sound of his reflected voice was still there and made me not hear what he was saying in this enormous space. It was helped with air pressure.
Yeah.
And my friend Mark Jelmy, who made fantastic speaker cabinets and rented out backline gear in Perth, he had an ear infection and he went in and out of that building too many times. And every time when he went in it, the ear gets a push and he lost his hearing on one side because of that bloody airlock there. Anyway, so there was motocross inside the Burswood, and for that it was completely like the loudest thing you've ever heard, because it resonated like fuck. So Mick Jagger was, by the way, the band with Joe Satriani in it. No one heard of him yet.
No.
And the other guy in the band later on turned up at the Fly, and I did sound for him. It was none other than New York's own Television, with one replacement guitarist, the same guy who was also in that Mick Jagger band at the time.
Wow.
I didn't know that when I did sound for him. I would have asked him about the Perth gig.
Sure. Yeah, the dome was terrible.
What I heard is so much frequency taken out of the PA by people tuning it that what they tried to reduce is to reflections. But the reflections were all mids. So out of the PA came just tizzy highs and a bit of lows. So you got closer to the PA, you still didn't hear a good sound because they over-EQ'd it as well.
Yeah.
And the first thing I thought, Rolling Stones would have advanced people who check out all the venues before they do this. Now it's Mick Jagger. He hasn't got the same support. And he's dropped himself in it. Yeah, that's what I thought.
Yeah, likely situation. As I said before, I've done sound on a very small basis, but I've still had my challenges. And one of the pet hates is turning up to a gig that someone has set up with the sound desk behind the band. And you're expected to walk up the front, come back, change the dials, go back up the front. Why is the desk behind the band?
Okay, now that makes me think of good old Mr. Gough Whitlam, who made Australia be filled with way more cultural centres in country towns. He promised them, way after he got the sack, they were still being built because he said that. Good thing. But it was the early 70s.
Sure.
They weren't really used to what a PA was. The PA started in 69 with Woodstock being a success. Not everybody figured out why it was a success. The reason it was a success is because the PA was far away from the microphone, so you could turn it up. Isle of Wight fucked up on that, so close you couldn't turn it up. The mixer was out front. While Isle of Wight, they were still doing it on stage, and that was a sonic disaster. Not for the movie making, but for the audience.
Yeah.
So in Australia, only 5 years later, they built all these concrete buildings with, right at the top of the stairs, a mixing desk behind a glass window.
Oh my God.
And I have done over the years hundreds of gigs in country towns in Australia in that situation. On top of that, some places are a bit big on security and doors. So as you're at the desk and you think, I'm just got to fix this up on the stage, I have timed myself to get down from the top to the stage at 2 minutes.
Right.
Another 2 minutes to get back.
You
know, like, how can you do anything like that? It's not. What it came from is that in the old days, sound for a play or whatever would have sound effects that came off a tape recorder. So the tape recorder would make a clack, because the tape recorders have got relays. When you hit the play button, it just goes clack when the head pops back on and it starts. So if you want a sound of the weather, the telephone, a car or whatever, you play this tape, but you have to be in a booth with a closed window so the audience doesn't hear that tape kicking in. Of course, nowadays it's just a little file on a computer with a program called QLab. But at the time, it was tapes, and you had to be isolated, and the sound person wasn't really amplifying voice. The sound person was adding sound effects.
Oh, yeah.
But yeah, doing sound for an audience and having the mixer in an appropriate position is sometimes a huge fight. And people say, but we sold the tickets. And I always say, well, you shouldn't have sold the tickets. There's a mixing desk there. So you have to get in early before they start selling it, otherwise you're in trouble.
I've been in various compromising positions like that as a sound tech. Or even I've been in a position as a producer, as an assistant producer, and reminding the head producer to invest in production before anything else. And then it's that particular situation got to a stage where it was like days to go.
Too late, man.
And it was all too late. And then people were like, oh, production. And I'm like, yeah. Without production, you don't have anything.
Well, it happens at the highest levels. I came to England, I quite liked U2, and I thought I'd love to work for them, but I became aware that their stage props, especially as it developed, were more important than the sound. So they would have a designer for the stage props, which started to take up space where you would hang up the PA. And then as the tour started, they'd get the sound people to just work around it, with putting their sound system no longer in the right place. To this day, the very last tour that they did, it was probably 2 years ago, involved a 15-metre high screen, which went from left to right, and then the PA had to be above it. The PA started 15 metres in the air.
Wow.
So those sort of decisions should not be made without sound people.
Exactly.
So when I teach my sound students at TAFE, I said, perhaps you can be the new generation who makes people aware not to think that sound is something you stick at the end of it. There's technical things that people don't even know of that need to be considered.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's safer that way. I mean, you're getting advice from people who know what they're talking about. More of a focus on aesthetics.
I see it the leftover of the theatre. In the theatre, you design the stage, you design the lights even, but you don't design sound apparently. Well, that did change when Cats started a long time ago already. There was a sound designer, I think his name is Martin someone, and with that, every production of Cats around the world had a similarity in the way the sound was arranged.
Oh, Cats.
But it was still rare, meaning that people just they call the look of it design, but not the sound. And the sound has to be considered the same way. It's not for looking at, it's for hearing, but it's designed all right. And a typical example is for the Spice Girls. I was lucky enough to be part of a Spice Girls tour in '98. I don't know if it's in my list even, probably not. But the Spice Girls had a very loud band and PA possibility, but completely brought down by their singing. So we'd have a sound check, we'd put up the band, go, fuck, that sounds good. And then the girls would come on and go, oh, we better bring it down again, otherwise we can't hear them. So, okay, they were on the stage at the time, 98. They had a reunion a couple of years ago where they built an enormous catwalk in front of it, and people complained they couldn't hear them. But they said, oh, we could hear them sing. Yeah, because it's all backing tracks.
Backing tracks.
Right? But when they talked, we couldn't hear them. Yeah, that's right, because they sort of talk softly in the microphone in front of a huge PA system, and people said we couldn't hear them talk. That's because somebody designs this flippant catwalk for a band that doesn't put a loud signal into their mic. You can do it for Mick Jagger. He will howl away in that thing. But not for soft singers. You can't stand in front of a PA. Just look at the specs of an SM58. The front and the back is at least 20 dB different. So the moment you get in front, you can't go 20 dB as loud. So if normally you can hit them with 110, now you're down to 90. And that's almost below where people start to take interest in it.
Let's talk tech. Let's not talk tech forever. Don't ever say that to a tech. But yeah, let's just briefly talk about the evolution of sound production.
Well, I was just interested in songs, right, in music, and I was never really a technical person other than because I had to. Like, I was interested in being a radio ham because I wanted to talk to people far away. And I was interested in sound equipment because I wanted to hear the bloody sound, but I didn't get too far into the technical side of it. But I must say, overall, what's happened is that sound didn't really get good till they started building very large systems, initially based on the cinema design. And cinema sound was designed in the 1930s. And when that got used in the late 60s, it was only 30 years old, and they suddenly had to make it portable. The cinema was fixed. And they couldn't put it in the middle. The old cinema had a whopping big speaker stuck behind the screen, and that was a screen with holes in it, and that's how it worked. So now you had to have PA left and right, the band in the middle. That's in itself not ideal. The Albert Hall, when I worked for Turbo Sound, we developed a central PA above the stage. It was much more friendly with this reverberant place than a left and right system. Anyway, most people have left and right, and the separate low, mid and high speakers from the cinema slowly all became smaller and closer together, and the amplifiers going from, in the 30s they were like 4 watts, and in the 60s they were 300 watts, and they're going into thousands of watts now. So I liked it when it got bigger and bigger and bigger, and I haven't liked it so much when it got smaller.
Right.
The reason to make the speakers smaller was said, yeah, well, there's less petrol, less diesel, because we're going to transport this from A to B, so we want your system smaller. And at that very moment, the video screen started to appear and took up all the truck space.
Oh.
So video is bigger in what it takes in the truck than sound.
Wow.
And I'm sure that's important to many, but not to me. I like to be sound. So that excuse of not having money for it, no, it just went somewhere else.
Oh.
So, example, a line array is a skinny stack of speakers that is made to be super powerful because each speaker is real narrow. The idea is you stand there, you only hear one. The other one goes a bit above your head, the other one a bit in front of you. It's a very popular technique that started 25 years ago by the French, L-acoustic, VDOS. But you can run out of power. And if you look at the example of, say, Dave Ratt, who used to mix the Chili Peppers, he would hang a second system next to it. Now, the whole reason you've got this long thing is that you don't have a PA beside it itself, because that way you have different path lengths, and path lengths means that you can hear the sound a bit later, it shifts the tone, knocks the tone around, call it comb filtering. So what he did is he would put the voice in one and the band in the other.
Oh.
It wasn't the first, because I remember in the 70s that's what Cliff Richard's PA was.
Oh, okay.
A whopping big system for the band and one for the vocals, and that way you wouldn't get this width of speakers all doing the same thing, because this was vocals and that was band. You wouldn't have the mids of the voice here and there and being out of time when it hits you. So you can do 2 hangs and have a band and a vocal separately, but not everybody gets to that. And the end result that I hear standing in the audience is things that are sonically less impressive than perhaps 25, 30 years ago. So you think it all just got better and better, but no, it then went backwards because of money and size and all of that.
Well, it makes sense for technology to be sort of compact, but have the same result or a better sort of result.
See, to get that narrow speaker that is only 5 degrees vertical on the horn in a line array, they have to have a fair amount of mechanical molestation of the sound inside this thing. The sound that comes outside just wants to come like a slice of a cake or whatever, but then it gets made to be this wide because of a waveguide. And this is the invention that made all that possible. A waveguide takes the sound and distributes it and the way that you design it. But to me, the sound hitting that sounds a little bit like someone speaking with false teeth that aren't quite fitting.
Right.
And that's the start of it. And then there's other parts of it that the digitization of it all, to me, makes the top end also sound like this. And it used to be clearer and more transparent.
Yeah. One thing I used to notice at the big day out was the wind would really...
Yeah, and this is the new line arrays with the 5 degrees, 27 years ago they came out. That 5 degrees means that the wind blows it about. Right. Well, in the old days, you'd have 30 by 40 degrees, and you would still be in the range of the horn as the wind gave it. So a little wind fucks up your line array quicker than the old wider horns would have been. Yeah.
I'm quite amazed. I've got friends that still do sound, and on the occasion I've worked with them, I'm quite amazed by this automatic digital mixing process where you can now roam around the venue or the stage with a tablet and direct sound from there.
It's good, but you don't want to overestimate what it does. Anything that runs with either like Bluetooth or the other one, those two ways of talking to equipment is about controlling the equipment. The sound isn't in it.
No, it's about controlling equipment.
Yeah. So,
but it gives you a sort of
Wi-Fi. That's the reason why your phone doesn't drive ear monitors, because it can do Wi-Fi or Bluetooth, but you can't have ear monitors off Wi-Fi or Bluetooth because that is a data transmission that may not be in time.
Yes.
Sometimes it's very late, especially if lots of people in the room with Bluetooth and different Wi-Fis, because it sort of waits for its turn. But the sound that's in your desk can be controlled by Wi-Fi. You need a little Wi-Fi, what do you call those things you have at home? A modem. You need a modem, and with that you can have a strong signal to your tablet or your iPad, and then you can walk around the room. But of course we're talking about mixing on a touch screen, because basically the old analog controls are the control. The touch screen is sorry, I didn't mean that, and it may just be me with my fat fingers, but going tap tap tap, and it's now it works. All of that has to be in time with the music, not when it decides to do it for you. And my biggest thing, once I'm down to complete sort of silence, beautiful music and a voice and a little hint of ambience, is that it's subtle. I have very subtle little bit of ambience, a bit longer on this word, a bit shorter on the other. That's mixing for me sometimes. Can't do that on a touch screen at all. You need faders. That's why the digital desks still have a sliding knob at the bottom for you to do that with.
Absolutely. I think, you're right. And it is more about sort of convenience and control. But it really it does depend what's going on stage. And how much.
Forget sometimes you don't have to do anything. So you set it, and you can permanently leave it like that. I'm talking about tracking the music with faders. But the advantage of digital desk is the memory. Like we used to stick the whole desk full of sticky tape or take photographs in order to remember. Being able to remember that is a huge advantage.
I think logistically, digital has a lot of pros.
But then there's the reliability factor.
Sure.
Now there's my Facebook friend Robert, who does sound in America for Kenny Chesney, And he sits there at his desk, and there's another one there. And I'd say, what do you do? See how that's the support band? He goes, no, everything that's in here is in there as well, just in case.
Yeah.
So he's got 2 desks going. They're both digital, but and AC/DC used to be like that. They actually had an analog desk and a digital, and they never quite trusted the digital. The introduction of digital in Perth in the mid-90s was hilarious. It was Neil Diamond with his trusty old sound engineer, Stan the Supermarket Man. Now, Stan from Stanile Sound from Seattle designed a speaker called the Stanley Screamer. He was a man who was called Stan the Supermarket Man because he developed a system with a wand and a barcode where at the loadout he would barcode read everything to make sure it got in the truck.
Oh, yeah.
You know, a great organiser. So
right.
One of the first digital desks by Yamaha, he's got one.
Oh, okay.
And here comes at the Burstwood, Neil Diamond, and he's got a female singer all the way from the USA to sing one song, You Don't Give Me Flowers or whatever. I think it's that one or it's similar to that one. And she comes on and her mouth is moving, you can hear nothing. And Stan at the desk is going tap, tap, tap. The whole song passes, you don't hear her.
Oh.
Okay, now I've never had that with analog desk, never. Because if anything breaks, there's the spare mic, boom.
Yeah.
A few words, man.
I have a similar, when I've DJ'd at weddings, I only play vinyl, and that's why people hire me.
Right.
But then there's people who want to do, who want me to plug in an iPod or a phone and things like that. And in my consultation, I say to my clients, if I've got it on vinyl, we'll play it on vinyl. We can do the digital thing, but it usually, I have more control over my turntables than I do over digital technology.
People don't understand the difference between having it in their phone downloaded or streaming it off the internet right there and then, of course is going to hiccup.
Yeah,
pause.
I played I DJ'd at a wedding some years ago, and they insisted on playing through a iPod, you know, and I'm like, okay, cool. So I queued it up and everything, and it was the bridal dance, you know, it was the main dance, and I hit play, and nothing happened, and the bride's looking at me, and I'm going, it's delaying, and then it finally played. But I give people the option is like, this is what happened. This is what can happen with digital. But if I've got it on vinyl, or if I can find it on vinyl, I cue it up and off it goes, you know. Yeah,
so the Neil Diamond's vocalist wasn't heard, but then there was a second show.
Oh.
And the whole thing happened again.
Wow.
Exactly the same.
Really?
So when that happened in 95 or whatever, which is early days of digital, very first Yamaha desk, for years I just went, fuck that idea, because I like reliability.
Sure.
I teach plan ABC, that's what I call it in my teaching, and I say, let's set up a mix on the front of house for the monitors and send it there and see if it works, and then switch it off again. And let's plan a mix on the front of house on the monitor desk, and you need to have the cabling in it for it, or the routing or whatever. If you haven't tested it, it takes forever to do it sometimes. But that's what they should have done. Nevertheless, a desk not working like that. I've had analog desks die on me, but I fixed it again. Yeah. I haven't had them be dead and stay dead.
Oh, it reminds me of a desk I had to tackle at, it's the Aberdeen Hotel, but it was called the Game Bar or something like that. And on a couple of occasions I got called to run sound there. And it was literally finding the equipment, putting it together, and it was a mongrel PA system with this massive desk, old massive desk. And I literally had to be on the phone to my boss saying, what the hell do I do here? It was a huge desk.
I think they rented equipment from someone who was like the cheapest, and he always had PA systems that were made out of disparate parts.
Yeah, I remember putting it all together, and there was this hip-hop band coming to play, and these young hip-hop enthusiasts put on this night. It was a nightmare, and I finally got it all together. And they opened the doors, and it wasn't a very well attended gig, but the headline act was flying in from America, and they literally landed, took a cab to the pub, and went on stage. And by the time they came on, it was pretty late, and there was only about 25 people. But they were all into it, and this poor guy and his partner, who was also part of the act, they were just exhausted from their trip, and they got all the way to Perth, probably never been to Perth before. And I gave him this wireless mic, and he just looked at me and went, thanks, and just headed out and just belted out what he had to do, you know. But it was just one of those really challenging nights. And after that, I said, I'm never working there again. Mainly because the venue just didn't give a shit about the equipment.
There is a point to that. Having worked for Audex for 9 years, between, when was it, 87, probably to 96. Yeah. They did a lot of those installs, perhaps not the one at the Aberdeen at that time. And they were always faced with, shall we have a permanent audio guy in there who does everything? But that costs money.
Yeah.
How much money does that cost? And then, shall we just bear the cost of things that get stolen and trashed? And often the stuff that got stolen and trashed was less than paying somebody. So they go, okay, we're going to lose microphones, we're going to have stuff blown up, and we'll deal with it all, because paying someone every week costs us more.
It really comes down to, at the end of the day, the kind of attitude the venue has towards live music or live entertainment.
I must say that most people putting on live entertainment love it.
Yes.
Because the bottle shop makes more money. So if that's what we're talking about, pubs, the bottle shop, I don't drink alcohol, but my friend Maddie does, and I take him there sometimes. Why am I driving? Well, that's the other reason, you know.
Sure.
And I wait and I watch the entrance of Murphy's, whatever it is. And there's people coming up with trolleys that, to me, if I look at that, that's $500.
Yeah, absolutely.
But every minute or so. And I thought, this goes better than any other store. I mean, it's about 10 times the value of what runs out of Coles. And this is all just alcohol.
Yeah.
Perth is like a swamp of alcohol-drenched everything. And the money from that sometimes goes towards running a little music venue on the side of the building. But let's not forget the actual perspective of the owner, who has to love the music, and otherwise it doesn't give a shit anyway, because the money is somewhere else.
It's not even about a love of music, it's just a good business sense. It just really depends on the venue, people, and what their intentions or objectives are.
One of my favourite was the Hyde Park, where my own band, Rock and Handy, played between sort of 2000 and 2007, or was it even a year later? And it was Paul Higgins who ran it. He owned, the family owned it. And Paul Higgins's words to me were, well, they were going to open a bottle shop down the road, which would take all my business away from my bottle shop, or buy my business. So I had to sell.
Oh, the writing was on the wall, pretty much, you know.
And what I saw is that venue on every night had completely different tribes there. Even the big room, which is a jazz room, had video screens for footy games of teams from other cities that were not popular in Perth.
Right.
So instead of running the typical Dockers, whatever, Eagles one, it had the ones for the little groups who also had a place to go.
Yeah.
And that went for music the same. There was nights of electronic music.
Yep.
The best one that I saw that we should have made a documentary of was probably Saturday or Sunday, probably Saturday morning, when a whole lot of people in the 70s and 80s sang World War II songs, where the man in white polyester pants and bleached hair, looking like Liberace, played the piano.
Wow.
And that went on every week.
Oh, okay.
And these people are all dead now.
Yeah.
And we should have taken a good video documentary of that. And that was Paul Higgins just being welcoming to all sorts. We were part of a group of people that were probably more punk than anything else.
Sure.
And that was on at night, and then there was that in the afternoon, a complete contrast. And it was all welcome at the old Hyde Park.
Yeah, it was quite diverse. I did gigs for comedy shows out in that back area. and then you had your bands up the front. But I was never a particularly big fan of the sound there. It was just somewhere where you could play as loud as you want.
Well, I did sound there.
Well,
not quite the my favourite place either, but it was funny.
But it was fun, and there was Max Ducker who did sound there.
He did most of the sound.
He did most of it.
I felt sorry for him because my band wasn't easy either, but I did sound for the Homicides, who were the band often on the same bill as Donny Rat, still being a friend of mine now. And their singer, Elvis, I think was his name, I would put up 3 vocal mics, him being in the middle, and he would pull his lead up till it was as long as possible, and then he'd lasso it around the other 2 mics and then run out the door.
Yeah, right.
He would pull out 3 mics flat on the floor, all the leads, and in the end there was only one that worked, a couple broken. And normally as a sound guy I go, disrespecting the equipment. But it was just funny. I mean, the mics were Behringer mics, which cost $80 new. And the crowd was in a big huddle on the floor.
Yeah.
So in fact, I had a stool behind my mixing desk. But if I sat there, I could get slapped on the head with things flying by. So I actually had to stand on the stool and just look down on it. And I had no camera at the time. But what was on that floor was like complete anarchy and mayhem. And there was no one really getting hurt other than what they could handle,
Yeah, no, there was never any real trouble there. And there was no stage. It was all off the floor.
I love that.
It was punk as fuck.
I hate drum risers and I hate stages as well.
Okay, so these days you're a teacher.
Well, I was drawn into that by my ex-wife, Elizabeth Lukey, now in Broome. Many years GWN executive there.
Oh.
And I'm grateful to her for making that happen. She was at the time secretary to WHAM and said, Rick, we want to do seminars, why don't you do them? So I did sound for a band, I think they were called No Flowers, No Wedding Dress, at a WHAM event, and then got in front of the microphone and started explaining about sound. And that's what I got. I thought, these people like me to talk to them. Oh, bonus. I'd been on radio before. I didn't necessarily have fear, but also thought it'd possibly be boring. So that was a seminar, and it was followed after that. My start of teaching at the Whopper went like this. You'd think you'd be asked because of all your experience, and they know, nah. There was a guy from Guildford who was teaching sound, and he was not really known for doing live sound. He was a DJ, and he was leaving the job. By Bob the Wolf. Bob the Wolf, another local sound man, told me they're looking for someone to teach at the Whopper, perhaps something for you.
Yeah.
I was there for 14 years.
Wow.
So I was happy I achieved that. I wrote the syllabus for the concert sound part that I taught, so that's very much what I'm teaching from now. Not my own one, but that sort of thing, like nationally accredited
Awesome
courses. So that was 1990, and it went to 2004. And I was at the Whopper teaching students who went in all directions. A lot of them go to musical theatre, and some of them go to radio. And I still read on the end of anything done by the ABC. I go, is there one there? Yep, there's often an ex-student of me there.
Oh, wow, cool.
My best ex-student surpassed me because all my contacts in England was the Pink Floyd sound company, and my best student was Gavin Tempany, and he scored the monitor job with Dave Gilmour.
Oh, cool.
And his latest one was out on tour with Mark Knopfler. He's got 200 inputs in his monitor desk. He's got 60 plus outputs of his monitor desk.
Wow.
He says, I stand there and at no 30 seconds goes by without someone asking me to do something. I couldn't handle that. But
it's a high pressure job.
Oh, he's got sound for the lighting guys in their ears. He's got sound for the guitar roadies, does a special mix for them. Anyway, yeah, so that was the Whopper, and the Whopper I was live sound while they also did recorded sound for movies. And that same thing happens at the TAFE. But at the TAFE, I was asked to help out Paul McCarthy, who is a wonderful local musician, sadly missed now, who was running TAFE for a while till he sort of felt that the pressures from that weren't fun. He was teaching, and he found his sound person totally unreliable and not able to complete a recording that they had promised the students. So there was all this half-recorded stuff never mixed, and the guy disappeared. Dodgy as hell, but I got in there at 96, wanting to finish that recording, and I'm thinking I'll do this in about a month. Instead, I was asked to then teach, and I was asked to run it, But I thought, no, for the same reason as Paul later not staying, I don't want to deal with all the meetings and all that. So I teach students who want to know about sound, and that's very, very rewarding to myself.
Absolutely.
Anyway, in the end, I didn't mind, because if I would have been at TAFE from 2000 to 2014, when I joined again, I would have had this public service life that was a bit too easy.
Yeah.
Instead, what I did in that entire time was the fly-by-night in Fremantle and the Charles Hotel Blues Club, which enlarged my whole social outlook. All these local people that play music, I know them now, which before I only knew little sections. Now I know the whole bloody lot, because they all went through those places. So I'm grateful for that, but it wasn't easy money-wise.
No. Do you remember at the Fly-By-Night Club, I want to say 2007, I think, when I worked for Revelation Film Festival?
You were there at some point.
And we did opening night at the Fly-By-Night Club with a live television show.
Yeah,
it was
I was probably there, because
you
I
were
remember
there.
you being there.
You were there.
We've done a few live television shows. We've done that movie review thing of SBS in there.
That's the one I'm talking about.
Oh, is that what it was?
Yeah. And do you remember the band that played? Probably not.
Faintly.
Oh, anyway,
Were you in
I
it?
wasn't, but I they were my Frankenstein monster. The festival, I was working for the festival, and I was asked to find a house band to go with the festival, and there was no one really suitable that I could find, and so I approached TAFE Music, and they gave me 5 young fellas, and we and I formed this festival band.
Custom made.
Yeah, custom made band, and they were all. It was instrumental, no vocals, and they were great. Anyway, they debuted live on television at the Fly-By-Night Club. Wow. Yeah, and that was a great gig for me. I got to meet, television producers and cameramen, and I got to meet the presenters of the show. It was awesome.
Live sound for TV is quite different, because people aren't really speaking loudly in microphones right on their face, which means that you can't turn it up in the PA unless the PA is far away. So the technique is basically to not turn it up loud in big stacks on either side, but to turn it up louder in little ones further away.
Oh.
So I don't know if I was doing much of that day, but that's how I've done other TV shows, where the audience gets it, but it doesn't come out of a loudspeaker close to where the mics are. That's basically the technique.
I recently contacted SBS, and they sent me the footage of that show.
Right.
So if you'd like to see it,
Yeah. Send me a link, or I'll bring a stick or something.
I'll work it out. But it was good to see that, and the Fly was packed that night, and it was like a David Letterman setup with the band on the side and the presenters on the other side. And
I must say that at that time I was in a physical fitness that I don't have anymore. Because that would have been a lot of work. Everything was in a different place.
It was a big day. It was a big day and a big night, but it all came together really well, and I treasure that memory. Yeah.
Cool.
Well, Rick, it's been a while, and it's been a great interview, and but thanks for coming on the show, mate. And I really appreciate all your hard work over the years.
Oh, thank you. I love the subject. It's very flattering. And it puts my own mind. I suddenly remember things that I didn't remember.
Yeah.
So that's why I did it. I enjoyed it.
Good on you, Rick.
All right, thank you.
Thanks, mate.